He had a strange dream. In his dream, he found himself on planet Earth and watched a man who played the same game for hours on end. The man's character kept dying, but he started all over again, over and over again. The young observer could not understand why this did not become boring. After all, the game boiled down to endless and increasingly absurd deaths. The game was called Demon Wars, and its goal seemed to be to rescue a minor character named Evan de Certain. This name struck the young man. He thought he had misheard. A character named Evan died over and over again, and there were rumors that until he died, the game would be impossible to complete. Moreover, it was said that Evan was the double of the Demon King himself. Fans even created a club in honor of his death. However, the man he was watching did not give up and returned to the game again. And suddenly the young man realized this was not just a dream. It was a memory from his own life. He woke up from his own screams. The maids rushed into the room worriedly. The guy didn't understand where he was and what was happening. He found himself in someone else's body, the body of the youngest son of Marquis Sheridan, the ruler of the city of Dungeon. His name was Evan de Sheridan. In front of the mirror, he realized that he was an ordinary guy named Bang Min, who for some reason was reborn in the world of his favorite game, Demon Wars 3. He knew this world, and he knew its cruelty. The minor characters here died painfully and inevitably, and this was exactly the fate that awaited Evan. But he wasn't going to put up with it. He didn't know how or why he ended up here, but he made a decision to become that minor hero who wouldn't die. He had a nightmare, frightening and all too realistic. It was as if he was playing a familiar game again. This time, he defeated the Demon King and saved Evan. But suddenly a monstrous hand burst out of the monitor, holding a sword. An ominous voice told him he was destined to die. The reason? He was Evan. Waking up in a panic, the boy realized it was not just a dream. It all seemed too real, because it was reality. His previous life on Earth, in Bon Ming's body, was left behind. He was reincarnated in the body of a boy from the game, Evan de Sheridan, the youngest son of the Marquis of the City of Dungeons. This body was weak and unfamiliar, but Bang Ming's memories and mind remained with him. He knew that the world around him was an exact copy of the game Demon Wars 3. And according to the plot, Evan always died. He urgently needed a plan to survive. He reminded himself that despite his body's age, he was an adult with 29 years of life experience. The first step was to restore forgotten knowledge about the game and its mechanics. He came across magical artifacts, records in the form of books that could only be read by the owner. In one of them, he left information about how he first learned about the game, went through its plot, and how he spent weeks studying each ending. He recalled that Demon Wars 3 was known for its freedom of choice and tragic endings. The final ending, which involved the female characters, was particularly difficult. He was never able to get through it. He always died. Evan died 46 times, at the hands of girls from curses, accidents, and even in the final battle, saving the main character. But it was this last death that inspired hope. To survive until the end and sacrifice himself, Evan had to grow up, become stronger. So he had a chance. This thought cheered him up. He screamed with joy and frightened the maid who entered the room. He recognized her, Mabel, the same girl who, according to the game's plot, was in love with Evan, but one day killed him out of jealousy. She apologized for the spilled soup and left, unaware of how important her role was. Even here, within the safe walls of the castle, he felt death was near. He didn't have a heroic role. He was just a secondary character, doomed to die. But now he had a goal: to break the script and survive. When Mabel brought in the new food, he already knew where to start. And this story is just beginning. There were mystical dungeons in this world. Horrible monsters were free to roam the land, and it was against them that the knights fought, using their sword skills. The magicians cast the most powerful spells. This is what the world looked like inside the game. Evan was thinking about the best way to survive here. He needed to increase the level of his abilities, because the level in the game meant his rank in life. As he grew, so did the mana needed by the mages. With its help, the warrior became stronger and it was much more difficult to kill him. Mabel heard his thoughts. She didn't like it at all that her young master was going to go to the dungeon. She was categorically against it. Evan tried to convince her that it was just his thoughts. However, Mabel reminded him that as an aristocrat he was only allowed to enter the dungeon upon reaching adulthood. That was impossible now. Everything went according to the scenario that he had thought out in advance. He said the word level out loud on purpose so that Mabel could hear it. He wanted to see her reaction. The first word she said was dungeon. Then he realized that the locals clearly had problems with knowledge. Over the 9 years of living in Evan's body, he had already managed to understand this, and the conversation with Mabel only confirmed his suspicions. He became convinced that the people of this world were deeply mistaken in believing that one could only increase one's level by going into dungeons. Of course, this could indeed strengthen them. After the appearance of the dungeons, people became despondent. But later, having discovered treasures there, they changed their minds. This later prompted people to form dungeon raids, which led to chaos. As a result, the kingdom decided to appoint aristocrats to manage the dungeons. Thus, the city of the underground appeared, and its ruler was none other than Evan's father, Marquis Solin de Cheaton. Evan knew there were other ways to level up besides dungeons. He was going to use all the knowledge he gained during the game to become stronger. Without noticing, he blurted it out loud. Mabel immediately became alarmed. The young man tried to assure her that everything was fine and that he didn't mean it. Evan was one of the most attractive characters in the game. Even though he was only 9 years old, his charisma and charm were obvious. This is what allowed him to easily charm 13-year-old Mabel. However, he knew what it could lead to. His future would be darkened by blood if he got close to the girl. Therefore, he should avoid any romantic encounters. Now he needed one thing: to find a way to survive. And the first step to this was to level up. He asked Mabel when his birthday was. She replied that it was next Wednesday. Then he asked the maid to tell his father that he wanted to talk to him. For his plan to succeed, he needed to obtain one thing from the Marquis Solin de Cheaton. It was about the Mirasol pendant, the first artifact their family had found in the dungeon. Until now, no one knew how to use it. The protagonist was able to obtain the pendant only after he made a deal with Evan, who gave him the artifact. Now was the perfect time to activate the suspension. The young man remembered that it was during its activation that Evan died last time. When he tried to restore his mana and cast a spell, he was attacked by a horde of slimes. He couldn't stop them. It was horrible to watch as the slugs completely devoured his body. However, at that moment, as a player, he learned an important feature of the artifact. For each killed slime, 1 unit of experience was awarded. In this way, it was possible to gain experience, and its accumulation increased the standard of living. In the game world, every action promised a result. It brought points. Whether you were training or fighting monsters, repeating the same action allowed you to gain experience. People believed that this sharpened their skills, but in reality the experience only prolonged their existence. Evan was once a player himself. Then he discovered that along with the dungeon levels there is another one: the level of existence. However, unlike the normal level, its development depended not on the number of enemies killed, but on the abilities of the person himself. And most importantly, there were no limitations to the level of existence. When the maid returned and said that the Marquis was already waiting for him, Evan was ready. He had gained experience in the war against demons through countless attempts, and his level of existence allowed him to use even the experience he gained as a farmer to level up his abilities. But killing mobs was too dangerous a method for his age. He decided to take a different approach, summoning weak slimes using the Mirasol pendant, which only required 1 unit of mana to activate. Theoretically, he could summon 100 of these creatures if he managed to gather enough mana. When Evan entered the room of his father, Marquis Solin de Cheaton, he was glad to see his youngest son. When asked why he had come, Evan, with childish persistence, asked for his gift ahead of time: the Mirasol pendant. The Marquis was surprised. He expected a request for a sword or another artifact, but not for a family heirloom. However, looking into his son's pleading eyes, he gave in. Father, although not without doubts, gave the pendant, warning that in the future Evan would have to return it, since the number of simultaneously used artifacts in this world is limited, no more than 5. With the pendant in his hands, Evan remembered how in his past life he had made a fatal mistake. He had activated the artifact without making himself its owner. This led to his death. But now he was not the naive boy he had been before. He cast the spell he had learned, the same one that had once killed him. This time, it would save him. The spell worked. He successfully activated the pendant and summoned the first slimes. Evan concentrated the energy in his hands and was able to summon the first slime. The creature looked quite cute, but he knew very well that despite their appearance, they were not completely safe. The slugs contained a weak poison inside. Even though he didn't pose a threat to him, the system could have reacted by lowering his health level to critical. And in the game world, this meant that the player could be finished off with a fatal blow. Without delay, Evan destroyed the slug. It was part of his plan for survival, his and Evan's. However, he soon realized that killing slugs required effort. It took at least 11 minutes to kill one. This training was not easy. It required stamina, concentration, and a large supply of mana. If he misjudged his strength, he could fall into a state of confusion, and until these symptoms appeared, he had to continue. Evan already had hundreds of deaths behind him, and now he wanted to make things right. He kept an eye on his stamina level, noting that he managed to destroy one of the slugs faster than the others. This made him wonder if his level had increased. He couldn't check this because there was no player profile interface here. But he realized that behind the repeated actions there was progress. Perhaps a skill was being formed. This also made it clear that Evan's physical endurance may exceed his magical potential. He felt it. The fatigue never came. Although in the game Evan was a mage, now everything could be different. Hearing his lamentations, the maid became worried, deciding that the master had suffered. But he assured her that everything was fine and simply wished to be alone. She, although anxious, left. Left alone, he began to draw up a detailed training plan. The first task was to strengthen the body. Then, to hone the technique of killing slugs. And in parallel with this, he was going to write down the knowledge in the form of a book about the creation of the world, where he would tell about the history of the war with demons, about hidden treasures and key figures who inhabited this world. He knew the game by heart, but it wasn't just a game anymore. He really was Evan, which means everything should have gone differently. He had to prepare, for real this time, and prevent the series of deaths that had once befallen this boy. Especially now, when one of the dangers was already lurking within the castle walls, Evan had to be careful with Mabel. Anything for survival. He made a training schedule and immediately began to strengthen his body. That night he went to bed, but in his sleep he was again overcome by horror, a nightmare about Evan being killed. Mabel and the other servants were discussing Evan's behavior, which had become alarming lately. Previously he was smiling and cheerful, but after the fever he suffered, the boy changed noticeably. His new reserve frightened the maid. Another maid added that before the young master was constantly running around the house, causing mischief and disturbing everyone's work. But now he has become quiet and calm. There was silence in the house, which surprised everyone. One of the servants reported seeing the boy doing exercises in the garden. This shocked everyone because Evan had never been remotely interested in physical exercise before. Mabel, worried, even burst into tears. It seemed to her that something terrible had happened to her master. The servants tried to console her, but at that moment another servant ran in with new news. Evan was lifting boulders in the garden. This caused even more shock. How could such a young boy move stones? It was becoming clear that something strange was happening to him. Mabel wanted to rush to him immediately, but she was stopped. Later, Evan had tea with his mother, the Marcus's first wife. She asked what he had been doing all this time. The boy replied that he was engaged in physical development and deepening his knowledge. The woman smiled and reminded him that he still had a whole year of freedom. After all, after that time he would begin studying at a school for aristocrats. Evan looked at her carefully. He knew why she looked so young in the game. The character designer had been fired, and her appearance had never been changed. The young man also remembered that in the game, it was exactly 1 year later that his character began his studies. History, etiquette, and other disciplines necessary for the heir of an aristocratic family. Evan confidently stated that he was ready, and would study hard when the time came. Mother suggested spending one of the days together and walking around the city, reminding him that the situation was currently unsettled due to problems with the dungeons. After drinking tea, Evan returned to his room and started training. He again leafed through the book he had written himself about the world, its structure, the war with demons and treasures. The young man realized that he urgently needed an assistant, someone he could trust and who could support his goals. He went through the characters in the game in his mind that could fit this role, but there was no suitable one. Until he remembered the Silent Knight, the second most powerful character after the main character. This character was incredibly popular. The boy came from a poor family, and after the instability with the dungeons began, he was sold into slavery. However, when he grew up, he returned to one of the dungeons and demonstrated outstanding results, becoming a living legend. But, like many bearers of divine power, a tragic fate awaited him. He was killed. Evan wasn't going to let that happen. He had already changed the course of Evan's fate, and he intended to do the same with the Silent Knight. His mother's words about the energy release in the city helped him remember that this character should be nearby right now. Events coincided. Action was needed immediately. He ran into the living room and announced to Mabel that they were urgently going shopping. She was surprised. Their house did not need anything. But Evan insisted and ordered the carriage to be harnessed immediately. They left for the city. Mabel watched her young master with concern. He became different. He didn't smile at her, as if he were a completely different person. She tried to find out why they needed to go to the city, to which Evan confidently replied, they were going to buy a person. The maid was stunned. Buying food or clothes was understandable, but a person? That sounded too strange. Evan explained that their path lay to the slave market. Right now, the Silent Knight is there, and he must save him at any cost. Evan had to go to the slave market despite the risk. He knew that later the Silent Knight could be bought by others, and then the chance would be lost. Mabel tried to dissuade him, reminding him of the danger, but he insisted on his own. The market they were heading to was under state control and considered legal. The system of slavery was regulated by laws, and only once did someone rebel against it. A bloody witch, famous for her cruelty and strength. Evan wondered where she might be now, assuming that she, like the Silent Knight, was still a child. They were accompanied by a security guard who was surprised by the boy's intentions. Evan explained that he wanted to choose his own person. At the market, they were met by the manager, who was also surprised by his visit. Evan refused to pass the request through his father and insisted on making a personal choice. The man ordered that all children of the appropriate age be brought. Among them, Evan immediately recognized the Silent Knight, a dark-skinned, black-haired boy, completely consistent with the image from the game. Next to him stood a girl with fiery hair, whom he also recognized as the future Blood Witch. Evan decided to buy both and paid a generous sum without bargaining. The deal was successful and they went home. Demigods were a special type of character in the game. From birth, they were weak and untrustworthy, but once they entered the dungeons, they revealed unique abilities within themselves. Two such demigods now stood before Evan. Evan introduced himself to them and asked their names. The girl's name was Belua, or Lua for short, and the boy's name was Shine. Shine was immediately suspicious and asked why it was bought. He did not want to become a toy in the hands of an aristocrat. Evan assured him that he had different goals. He saw potential in them that could manifest itself over time. However, the children did not believe his words. Shine recalled that even his own mother considered him useless, and Beloit expressed skepticism. To convince them, Evan claimed that he had the gift of seeing hidden abilities in people. Despite their doubts, the children listened to his proposal. They would serve him for 3 years, during which Evan would prove that they were extraordinary. If they don't see results in 3 years, they will be able to go free. Shine doubted that a slave could gain freedom, but Evan firmly promised to fulfill his condition. If the results are satisfactory, the children will be able to stay with him and continue serving. Hearing this, Lua and Shine didn't know what to do. The offer was unexpected, but the chance for survival and possible freedom seemed too valuable to refuse. The children agreed to Evan's proposal. He assured them that one day they would become so strong that they would be able to prove their worth to their parents and earn their respect. After this, all three arrived at the castle. The servants immediately took care of the new arrivals. They changed their clothes and tidied them up. The knight accompanying Evan inquired about his intentions. He heard the boy talking to the children and was amazed at how confidently and convincingly he acted. However, he couldn't understand why Evan needed these children. Evan replied that everything he said was true. He knew that Shine and Beloit were special and would one day become truly strong. In 3 years, the knight will be able to see this for himself. When the children returned to him clean and dressed, they were at a loss. They did not understand what was now required of them. Evan explained that from now on they were to be with him all the time, except for the period set aside for training. He honestly admitted that he needed their protection. Shine immediately understood what this meant and asked a direct question about the possible threat. Evan praised him for his insight and confirmed that he could indeed be in danger in the future. He also revealed that he trains and hunts monsters to improve his skills. Then he asked what the children themselves wanted. Shine and Beloit were surprised. They didn't expect that they had any right to anything at all. Evan assured that as the son of the Marquis, he would fulfill any of their wishes, be it freedom, wealth, or anything else. He did all this not only for their benefit, but also so that they would never betray him, remaining forever on his side. Shine stated that his only wish was to destroy all the monsters that killed his family. This became his life's goal. He was willing to serve Evan forever if he could help him achieve this goal. Evan promised that going into the dungeons would make Shine stronger, and he would definitely succeed. Shine was surprised. He considered himself too weak for something like this. However, Evan assured him that with the right guidance he could pass the test without much difficulty. Then Evan turned to Beloit. The girl could not give a clear answer. She was still too young and lived in conditions where she only had to worry about a piece of bread. She didn't think about anything more. Her desire was simple, to gain strength to survive. Evan promised that over time she would understand what she really wanted, and she would definitely get the power. The children were filled with gratitude to their new master. They were ready to do everything he said. Evan introduced them to the training system. He knew that demigods developed more slowly than humans, but with maximum effort they could achieve outstanding results. During the game, he noticed that all the servants in Desjardins' house were distinguished by high endurance and a large supply of mana. Evan suggested that this was due to years of daily physical activity, cleaning, working, repeating the same loads. He concluded that regular repetition of routine actions increases endurance and magical reserves. And with these two qualities, you can master any skill. This is the system he proposed to Shine and Beloit. If they diligently and persistently carry out all his orders, they will be able to become much stronger. They faced more difficult conditions than ordinary servants, but if they could cope, the result would be stunning. Later they will go to the dungeon to consolidate the powers they have gained. The children agreed to the proposed conditions without hesitation. Evan called the headmaid to him and, using all his charm, began to beg her to take up the girl's education. The woman could not resist the boy's sincere pleas and agreed to take Beloit under her care. She also advised to contact the head butler to take charge of Shine's training. If Evan asks him just as sincerely, he definitely won't refuse. Evan realized that he would have to ask again, but this time he managed to get his way. The butler agreed and began to teach the boy. It was hard for Shine, he coped with difficulty, but he did not give up. He always remembered his goal, to avenge the destroyed family. The butler kept a strict eye on him, urged him on, did not tolerate slowness, but ultimately admitted that, despite his weak endurance, the boy's other qualities were well developed. If he tries hard enough, he will succeed. The butler promised to personally monitor his progress. Soon Evan was informed that his father wanted to talk to him. He came to him, and the Marquis asked how he was doing. Evan replied that everything was fine and that he was currently studying the Mirasol suspension. The father asked if he knew that this pendant could reveal new abilities to its owner. This came as news to Evan. The Marquis explained that when the stone inside shines fully, the pendant will reveal its power. This made Evan think that perhaps the level of the creatures he was training with would increase. He didn't want to die from their attacks at all, but he had no choice. He had to continue training. Then the father asked who exactly he had acquired at the slave market. Evan replied that these were his personal purchases and he was responsible for them. The Marquis had no doubts about his son. He only reminded him that the fate of these children was now in his hands. They had become his people. Several weeks passed, and Shine and Beloit showed outstanding progress in training. The head butler brought them to Evan and informed them that they could now train with the servants part of the time and spend the rest of the time with Evan. This was the boy's original goal, to keep them close to him. Evan assigned the butler to perform a special task. He brought ancient artifacts from the warehouse, 2 blades and a lamp, forgotten and long unused. Despite their unknown origins, Evan knew how to handle them. He gave the blades to Shine and the lamp to Beloit. At first, the children didn't understand what to do with it. Later, Evan explained to Shine that he needed to repeat one movement over and over again. The cut. If the weapon really suits him, he will master it quickly. By evening, Shine was already confidently handling the blades. With Beloit, things were more complicated. The lamp required not only desire, but also an understanding of the magical process. Evan told her that frequently lighting the lamp consumes mana and stamina, but helps develop magical talent. However, the girl did not know where to start. During her attempts, Evan's mother caught her doing this. Surprised, she asked who had given the girl the ancient artifact, and quickly recognized her as the very slave that her son had acquired. Having received confirmation that it was Evan who gave her the lamp, she decided to help Beloit, realizing that without mentoring she would not be able to master the technique. After 3 months, Beloit learned to consistently control fire through the lamp. Shine has also made significant progress in his use of blades. During this time, Evan himself achieved the ability to summon 2 slimes at the same time. He had already thought about giving up the Mirasol suspension, but after learning about the possibility of strengthening it, he decided to continue training. He hoped that by strengthening the summoned slimes, he would be able to increase his stamina and mana reserves. With each passing day, Evan became more and more convinced that in order to survive in this world, he would have to resort to every possible means of strengthening himself. In the future, this could save his life even in the case of such a banal threat as Mabel's kitchen knife. After all, not every danger comes from the battlefield. So it was time for the third stage of his plan, gradually developing immunity to poisons. This idea was not just bold but extremely risky, but in conditions of constant threat, it was absolutely necessary. Its implementation required special ingredients, rare, expensive, and in some places even prohibited substances that cannot be found in a regular pharmacy. Evan knew he couldn't find them on his own. That's why I decided to use my connections and include an adult approach, serious business, in my plan. He summoned Mabel and entrusted her with an important task, to convey a request to his brother, Eric Desjardins. But he didn't stop at a simple request. Evan had prepared a detailed plan in advance for expanding the Desjardins family business by adding a new direction to it, medical. He outlined a strategy that focused not only on the well-being of the citizens, but also on the market related to the needs of the players. Healing agents, restorative potions, and even preventative compounds. All this was supposed to become the basis of a new profitable direction. When Evan handed the plan to her brother, he was shocked by its scale and the depth of its development. The text was written with amazing precision and understanding of the market. Eric immediately suspected that behind the 9-year-old boy there was someone older, more experienced in business. He asked directly who had helped. However, Evan assured that he had done everything himself, from market analysis to calculations of supply costs. His confidence was so sincere that even Eric began to doubt his own suspicions. They went together to see their father to present him with the proposal. The head of the family was reserved about the idea, but could not hide his surprise when he learned that the author of the document was Evan. He asked only one question. Was the boy ready to take on such responsibility? Evan immediately explained that he was not laying claim to the entire project, but wanted to focus exclusively on the medical part, especially on the production of medical and protective equipment. He did not seek power or glory. He was interested in concrete results necessary for survival in a dangerous reality. The father was amazed by the maturity of his son's reasoning, but before making a final decision, he promised to discuss the proposal with the council. A few days later, the family circle and close partners gathered in the house. When the father voiced the initiative, the faces of those present reflected bewilderment. The proposal to engage in the production of medicinal products came from a 9-year-old boy. In itself, this seemed like a joke. However, the documents prepared by Evan quickly dispelled any doubts. The most impressive thing was how rationally the boy argued his idea. Producing potions specifically for players whose health is constantly at risk could significantly increase the family's income. The humanitarian underpinnings, concern for the health and safety of others, only added to the project's credibility. The father did not hide his pride and declared that he was going to personally present this initiative to the emperor for consideration. It was a real triumph for Evan. Despite the noble outward goal, he was clearly aware of his true motivation. All this was another step towards surviving in this dangerous and unpredictable world. He did not dream of honors. He built a system in which he could strengthen himself and protect himself. The main element of this plan was to be the production of poisons, but not for attack, but for training the body. He planned to test them on himself, using minimal doses so that over time he would develop a resistance to the deadly substances. However, there was an obvious problem in his way. He did not have a single experienced pharmacist. Finding a real specialist at such a young age was not easy, especially considering the specifics of the planned research. Moreover, even if he had mastered alchemy himself, potions prepared by a child would hardly be trusted in the market. People are not willing to take risks when it comes to their own health. And even more so, they will not buy potions that they are not sure about. This meant only one thing. In order for the project to work, it was necessary to either urgently find a recognized alchemist willing to cooperate or achieve such a level of mastery that he would no longer be perceived as a child. But Evan had already started moving forward. He wasn't going to stop. Now that his idea had received his father's approval and a chance to reach the level of the empire, he had his first real tool for implementing his vital plan. Therefore, first it was necessary to undergo training and then prove one's talent. Shine came to the rescue. He found a list of well-known pharmacists outside the city through the slave owner. Among them, Evan chose one, Bernard Garcia, an elderly hermit known for his knowledge of herbs. Despite the merchant's doubts, Evan insisted. He was the one needed. After all, in Demon Wars 2, Bernard was the greatest alchemist and a key supporting character. Evan didn't expect to see him in this part and couldn't pass up the chance. 4 days later, Bernard was brought to the palace. He was unhappy that a boy had called him, but soon he met Evan Hannah, a kind and smiling girl. The merchant reported that he had also found more demigod-class children, which made Evan very happy. Bernard was initially skeptical of the boy's intentions, but Evan offered a deal. If he really possessed unique knowledge, Bernard would stay with him for 5 years with pay. He, surprised by the impudence and confidence, replied that if he succeeded, he would stay for 50 years, and if Evan was lying, he would become his student. They went to the laboratory. There, Evan demonstrated a new way of growing medicinal herbs, laboratory cultivation, which he knew from the game. Bernard was amazed. He had never heard of such a method and admitted defeat. It was a shock to him. He, the greatest alchemist, for the first time did not know how the proposed method worked. He realized he had a lot to learn from Evan and signed a 50-year contract. So the greatest alchemist of Demon Wars 2 became part of Evan's team. From the very moment when the next event did not go according to the scenario familiar from gaming experience, Evan finally realized everything that was happening was no longer just a simulation. This is no longer a game where you can choose your lines, reload your saves, or plan your moves in advance without consequences. He was in reality, in a world where the franchise's characters, previously only known from the screen, actually existed. They lived, breathed, felt pain and joy. And therefore, the responsibility for each action became much more significant. His knowledge accumulated over the hours he spent playing the game was still useful. But Evan could now clearly see that a strategy book written based on the plots of the 3 parts of the Demon Wars was no longer sufficient. Some events changed, others developed differently, and even familiar objects behaved unpredictably. He continued to keep his personal book of strategy, adding to it daily, recording new discoveries, unusual interactions with characters, and emerging combinations of effects. This became his most important tool in adapting to a changing world. In parallel with his analytical work, Evan did not neglect physical training. He continued to train regularly, improving his fighting skills and honing his command of artifacts. Hunting for slugs, weak but numerous creatures that allow you to stay in shape, study new properties of artifacts, and even obtain resources for potions, has become part of your daily routine. However, he also understood that the future could not be built based solely on military force. It was important to develop other areas as well, particularly economic ones. One of these was the pharmacy business. Evan saw this as a prospect not only for profit, but also for increasing his influence in the city. Since he himself could not manage the pharmacy around the clock, he entrusted the management of affairs to Mabel. She had a keen eye for detail and was trusted by her team. He recruited Bernard and Hannah to collect rare ingredients and promote the products. Their task was not only to search for valuable herbs and mushrooms, but also to distribute trial potions through merchants and pharmacists. It was a subtle marketing move that was able to generate interest in the brand and establish its reputation from the very first days. The plan worked. After the shop opened, rumors about potions that could heal wounds faster than regular potions spread throughout the city at incredible speed. Already in the first days, queues formed outside the pharmacy doors. People, having heard about the miraculous mixtures, came with injuries, illnesses, or simply out of curiosity. In addition to regular sales, the pharmacists offered mutually beneficial exchanges, rare ingredients for ready-made potions. This allowed us not only to save on purchases, but also to expand the range. When the market, under whose protection Evan operated, was presented with a detailed financial report, he was genuinely amazed. The income received in a short time significantly exceeded even the wildest expectations. This proved that the project was not only viable, but also had enormous potential. Demand grew so rapidly that Bernard and Hannah could no longer cope with the volume of work. It was necessary to hire 2 more pharmacists and also establish a systematic supply of raw materials. With constant access to a variety of herbs, Evan began to do something he had not dared to do before. He began to develop a special tea, which included microdoses of various poisons. The goal was to gradually acclimate the body to toxic substances and develop resistance. The idea was risky, but necessary. He knew that the enemy would not warn before attacking. Poisons, dirty tricks, curses, all of these can appear at any moment, and to survive, you need to be prepared for everything. Shine and Beloit watched his experiments with alarm. Every time Evan drank this dangerous infusion, they held their breath. They thought that one day he would not be able to bear it. Death could occur at any moment, from a dosage error or an unexpected reaction of the body. But Evan was calm and determined. For him, this was no foolish bravado. He sincerely believed that there was no choice. In order to survive and achieve his goal, he had to go through this. Moreover, there was less and less time left. There was only 1 year left before the start of the school year, when he was to enter an educational institution for magically gifted people. During this time, he had to not only prepare but also become stronger than any other freshman. He had to withstand competition, keep his secret, develop his business, unite his team, and most importantly, not lose himself. Time was running out, and so Evan understood perfectly well that his plan for survival and strengthening his position in this world needed to be advanced as quickly as possible. He could not afford to relax or act at random. Every step had to be thought out in advance, every detail taken into account. Everything depended on his preparedness. Shine, noticing his comrade's tension, suggested acting more decisively and heading to the dungeon right now. In his opinion, this was a great opportunity to practice fighting, develop practical skills, test his strength, and even obtain rare materials. He believed that there was no time to waste, and the sooner they started, the better prepared they would be for future challenges. However, Evan had a different opinion. He refused to go on an immediate expedition, citing a previously made decision. The expedition to the dungeon should begin in exactly 3 years, not earlier. This was not just a whim or an excuse. He followed his strategy precisely. Evan understood that the team had not yet revealed even half of its potential power. Their current level of strength was insufficient to pass the trials that awaited them in the depths of the underworld. This means that premature intervention will only put everyone at risk. There was still too much to do before the real battle could begin. He also knew that the dungeons were inhabited by monsters whose meat was a rare but dangerous resource. It had toxic properties. Anyone who dared to eat it without proper preparation was immediately exposed to the most powerful poisons. The effect could be devastating. That is why taking such meat outside the dungeons was strictly prohibited. The law was clear. Even attempting to take it out was considered a crime. However, some took the risk. The meat fetched high prices on the black market. It was prized by alchemists, mercenaries, and madmen seeking to develop immunity to poisons or to use it as an ingredient in experiments. The thirst for profit pushed players into illegal transactions. Evan's maid, Mabel, noticed where he was heading and began to speculate. She suggested that the young man decided to buy this dangerous meat in order to accustom his body to poisons and develop resistance. The thought scared her. She knew what Evan was capable of, and she had no doubt that he would take such a step. But it seemed too dangerous even for him. Fortunately, her guesses turned out to be wrong. Evan was quick to allay her fears, assuring her that they weren't heading to the butcher's for meat. They were interested in something else, something more valuable and rare. As they approached the shop, the owner, a massive, sullen man with a stained apron, looked at them in surprise. He did not expect such unusual visitors. There was a note of alarm in the butcher's voice as he politely but cautiously inquired about the purpose of the visit. It was obvious that he was not happy with the uninvited guests, but Evan didn't hesitate and spoke directly. He said that he knew about the item that the butcher kept. This artifact was not listed in any register, did not appear in any trade documents, but information about it reached Evan. He didn't name the source, and it wasn't necessary. His confidence spoke for itself. The butcher tried to pretend he didn't understand anything. He pretended not to know what was being discussed and tried to avoid the conversation. However, Evan immediately recognized the lie. Experience, knowledge, and inner intuition did not fail him. He changed his tone and offered a deal. In exchange for that very artifact, he could provide the butcher with protection. Moreover, he was ready to take on the task of restoring the merchant's reputation, albeit through illegal methods. Perhaps even achieve official clearing of the name. But the butcher only shook his head sadly. His voice sounded bitter. It was too late for him to change anything. The past dragged behind it a heavy chain of mistakes that could not be corrected. He resigned himself to his fate. So Evan took a different approach. He offered to help get official permission to sell poisonous meat. It wasn't just a bold statement. He actually knew what to do. His connections, influence, and future resources allowed him to move the business in the right direction. The butcher was interested in this proposal. Hope flashed in his eyes. The silence did not last long. The man nodded, not asking for proof or further conditions. Evan took the item carefully. He knew how important it was. It was not just a piece of equipment, but part of a chain of events that could play a key role in the development of the entire party in the future. The deal was made. Without threats, without violence. only thanks to precise calculation and the ability to talk. Evan once again proved that he knows how to get his way. On the way back, Evan stopped at a few more places and purchased a few seemingly insignificant items. When they returned home, Shine and Beloit looked at their finds with bewilderment. The artifacts seemed useless, and not the slightest magical radiation emanated from them. But Evan explained, their power was hidden. To activate the effect, you had to touch one object and then another in sequence. He handed them the sphere and blades and suggested they try. Shine and Beloit followed the advice, and at that very moment they felt a wave of energy pass through their bodies. Unusual abilities awakened in them, and their faces lit up with surprise. It was a bug in the game that only Evan knew about. The world he found himself in was painfully familiar. He had spent hours of his life in this game before. He tried not to think about it too often, but sometimes he encountered events that completely repeated the plot. It was impossible to ignore them. More and more often he wondered, is this world real? And does he really live here now? Shine and Beloit were shocked to feel the new power. Now it became clear to them why the artifacts were sealed in such a complex way. Shine couldn't help but notice to himself that if their young master knew about this in advance, it meant he really knew what he was doing. Evan watched them silently. He saw the plot begin to unfold in a new way. Shine noticed the gentleman's thoughtfulness and asked what was troubling him. But Evan just smiled and said he was glad. He was pleased that the boys had gained strength. He looked back at Shine and Beloit. There had been no problem with them from the start, and this gave hope. Perhaps everything really would go according to plan. Evan decided to take up hand-to-hand combat. Heading to the training field, he encountered the army captain, a man who, in the previous version of events, died during the attack on the Marcus's family, just like the hero Evan was playing as at the time. Previously, he had not felt anything special from the man, but now he clearly felt the danger emanating from him. The captain took the initiative and insisted on personally training the young master. Evan hadn't planned to agree, but he had no choice. Refusal would have been inappropriate. It had been 2 months since the captain had started training. Evan and Shine were training hard in hand-to-hand combat, and at times Evan felt like he might not be able to take it anymore. However, his body became stronger and his spirit became more resilient. He began to understand that he was capable of more than he had previously thought. Belua took care of him. She offered to wipe the sweat from his face, brought him chilled honey lemon tea to help relax his muscles. She also monitored his well-being because the loads were serious. At the same time, Shine remained cheerful and almost never tired, which surprised those around him. One day, the captain announced that he would not be able to conduct training the next day. He had to clear the dungeon with his squad. This came as a surprise, as Michael had never taken part in such expeditions before. However, watching Evan's success inspired him to strive for his own development. It used to be said that the power gained in the dungeons was worthless. But now the captain wanted to test it himself. Despite his age, he strove to become stronger and prove that he was capable of more. Evan was happy for him. If Michael returned alive and well, it would benefit the whole family. The captain had once received a divine blessing, and now Evan took it as a sign. Gifts like these don't just come out of nowhere, especially if they appear after progressing through dungeons. For Evan, it was a symbol that his efforts were indeed rewarded. He understood that the path to the dungeon would not be easy. There he would have to avoid traps, constantly fight, and be at the limit of his abilities. But the reward for this was appropriate. Successful completion meant becoming stronger. The captain intended to return and become an even better mentor to the boys. He was inspired by this decision and wanted to continue training the guys with double the strength. 4 days have passed since the captain and his squad went underground. Evan, meanwhile, once again remembered his previous meeting with the owner of the slave market. The man who had connections to the slave market kept his promise and brought more people. At first glance, they seemed quite ordinary, not at all resembling demigods. However, Evan understood that this did not always indicate their true nature. His memory was filled with images of many demigods who never had time to reveal their powers and died at a young age without knowing who they really were. Evan checked the list provided to him, but quickly realized that not all the children he needed had been found. This task did not initially promise an easy road. He had no names, only a rough description of appearance. He knew that in the original game, players chose their own names for their characters, and it was likely that some of them hadn't even appeared in the world yet. So all he could do was ask his contact to stay alert and report any coincidences. He later tasked Mabel with taking care of the children he found, getting them clean, and providing them with protection. As he searched for a way to escape, he increasingly noticed that instead of focusing on his own safety, He was pulling out others, those who could one day become key figures, demigods who could change the course of the future. But they were in danger with him around. He knew that his presence only increased the likelihood of their death. After these troubles, Evan headed to the drugstore. The weather was hot, and Bernard expressed concern at how hard it was for Hannah to wear the thick uniform. He proposed introducing a summer uniform. Evan quickly realized that the old man's motives were not so noble. He was clearly interested in how the girl would look in more revealing clothes. But after weighing everything, he agreed. The heat was indeed a hindrance, and the uniform needed to be updated. He promised to look into the matter upon his return to the castle. Hannah was grateful. Bernard, observing Evan's desire to develop strength, offered his help. He immediately realized that the balance in the young man's body was disturbed, which meant that his energy was being distributed incorrectly. Alchemy, the old man said, could correct this. Evan accepted the offer with gratitude. All that was required was to prepare yourself, gather the necessary ingredients, and be ready for serious training. Meanwhile, discontent grew in the temple. The bishop received alarming news. Income had fallen sharply and donations had dwindled. The reason for this was a recently opened pharmacy run by the fraternity. This deeply angered him. In the eyes of the bishop, the actions of the brotherhood were contrary to the will of God. He considered their methods vicious and intended to take countermeasures. He was not going to ignore the problem. The training was draining for Evan. Each session took a lot of energy from him, and by the end of it he felt extremely tired. Seeing his condition, Hannah offered to help. Bernard, watching the young man, could not help but notice that at this rate progress would be slow. However, he was comforted by the thought that he still had 50 years ahead of him, which he was ready to devote to teaching Evan. But the boy himself, without delay, cited urgent matters and left the pharmacy. After he left, Hannah inquired about the young man's progress. Bernard noted that it would not take 50 years. Even now, Evan was showing rare tenacity and talent, and the old man had no doubt that in 5 years the student would be equal to him in level. This kind of cooperation brought him real satisfaction. Hannah offered to help with the classes, as the flow of clients had noticeably decreased. The reason for the decline in attendance, as it turned out, was a blessing event organized by the church. At the same time, the bishop listened with satisfaction to the reports. The number of parishioners was increasing, and everything was returning under control. He felt the influence of the church growing stronger and was going to finally establish its power. At the same time, despite his internal cruelty, he did not yet plan for civilian casualties. Evan, in search of influence, went to one of the city's cafes where he discovered Servina Balan, the bishop's assistant. The girl was carefree and enjoying beer and fried meat, clearly in a relaxed state. In the future, she was destined to occupy the high position of bishop and play an important role in the development of the church order. Now she was young, bold, and drunk. She discussed the greed of priests with undisguised irritation and cursed the church without hesitation. She said that she was ready to drop everything and leave, despising the hypocrisy of the authorities. Evan immediately realized that he had an opportunity. If Servina could be won over to her side, her influence could change the course of events in the future. He offered her protection and anonymity, promising personal support away from the pressures of the church. But Servina refused. Her goal was not to escape, but to transform the system itself from within. She had already promised herself to change the church, even at the cost of her own struggle. Evan remembered that in the fourth part of the game, Servina will indeed lead the main core of the Order of the Great, located not in Sheridan, but in another region. Under her leadership, the Order will undergo reforms, but will ultimately be destroyed. Evan could not allow the tragic outcome to repeat itself. He was confident that by enlisting Servina's support and giving her freedom, he could change the future. The next day, the young man reported that he had learned alarming news from an anonymous source. The church was preparing an attack on their establishment. The threat was predictable, but it still caused a storm of determination in him. He immediately assured all workers that no one would be left without protection. Any attempt to harm one of them will be regarded as an attack on the entire marquisate. His words sounded confident, and there was not a drop of doubt in them. Everything would be fine. In response to the church's actions, Evan decided to be proactive. He ordered preparations to begin for a large-scale charity event, the distribution of potions to the poor living in the slums. This initiative not only demonstrated strength and concern, but also dealt a blow to the influence of the church. All employees immediately got down to business. They worked harmoniously and quickly, absorbed in the common goal. Evan was personally involved in the process, remembering how desperate the slum dwellers often were. how much they lacked even the simplest potion. They worked tirelessly and eventually managed to create enough potions to provide everyone in need. Meanwhile, the chief knight of the Marquisate received an urgent report about an impending attack on the pharmacy. Without wasting a second, he and his squad headed back, aiming to arrive on time. On the way, Evan suddenly felt a strange presence. His gaze caught sight of a silhouette wrapped in an invisible cloak. This man was no ordinary spy or mercenary. Evan immediately recognized him as one of the game's key antagonists, an assassin sent to eliminate him. Everything was obvious. The bishop himself was behind the assassination attempt. But the boy was prepared. He didn't just expect a possible attack. He foresaw it. The precautions taken in advance should have given him a chance to survive. Everything went exactly as he expected. Evan gave the order to his knight to immediately eliminate the invisible enemy. He, without hesitation, promised to do everything possible. But the young man could not allow such a loyal protector of their family to be exposed to danger alone. He decided to intervene personally. After asking the knight to close his eyes, Evan used a potion that could reveal hidden objects and creatures. The enemy was immediately detected. His outlines appeared through the illusion of invisibility. The knight, having received a visual reference, immediately rushed to attack and disarmed the attacker. However, it soon became clear that there were two enemies. Evan eliminated the second enemy himself, with unexpected dexterity and precision, worthy not just of a player, but of a strategic warrior. Thanks to precise coordination of actions, both attackers were successfully captured alive. News of the attack quickly reached the Marquis, who was furious when he heard the details. Despite the lack of direct evidence of the bishop's involvement, the Marquis was confident that he was behind the assassination attempt. No one was allowed to encroach on his son and the honor of the Desjardins family. When he was informed that Evan had requested a meeting, the Marquis immediately appeared. However, his son asked him to hold off on his actions. He only needed 4 days. A key role in his plan was played by a trusted person who was supposed to pass on information about the thefts committed by the bishop to the highest church leadership. After this, when the church begins its own investigation, the Desjardins family will offer to help solve the problem. This will eliminate the enemy and, at the same time, strengthen the family's position within the church hierarchy. The father asked how much one could trust a person playing such an important role. Evan assured him confidently that he was reliable. The Marquis nodded, deciding to refrain from immediate action. Before leaving, he ordered Mabel and Beloit to take the best care of his son, who was already acting as the true head of the family. Servina has compiled an extensive dossier confirming the bishop's years of fraud and embezzlement. The documents were delivered into the right hands, and the verdict followed immediately. The punishment turned out to be extremely severe. The bishop was executed. Servina herself was shocked by such a swift and merciless reprisal, but Evan only calmly noted that he got what he deserved. He thanked the girl for her assistance and for saving the employees of his pharmacy. From that moment on, Servina began to look at the young man with new respect. His composure, prudence, and extraordinary intelligence did not go unnoticed. However, Evan had his priorities straight. He had no intention of turning her into a servant for the Desjardins family. On the contrary, he needed an independent bishop, capable of acting in his interest while remaining formally within the structure of the church. Meanwhile, the Marquis, the head of the Desjardins clan, gave strict orders to arrest and publicly execute the bishop. Until the very end, he did not believe what was happening, not realizing how far he had gone. However, the Marquis was adamant. In one version of the game, it was he who personally destroyed not only the bishop, but also all of his closest henchmen, becoming one of the most terrifying figures in the third part. After the culprits were punished, Servina, on the recommendation of the Desjardins, was appointed the new bishop of the city of Sheridan. This appointment was an unexpected but logical conclusion to the political upheaval. Meanwhile, Evan continued to work tirelessly. The pharmacy flourished, the family's influence grew, and rumors of the extraordinary talents of the Marquis's youngest son began to spread. The servants discussed how he seemed to already surpass Eric, the older brother who was considered the main character in the original story. These conversations reached Evan himself. Hearing them, he realized that such a plot twist was not at all part of his plans. He shouldn't overshadow Eric. Not wanting to upset the balance of history, Evan decided to immediately announce to everyone that he did not intend to claim the title of Marquis. Instead, he planned to become the head of a knightly company. That way he could remain in the shadows and continue to operate from within without changing the overall course of events. Evan approached Mabel with a question about what the duties of an aristocrat who became the head of a city were. The girl explained that the responsibility for the safety of the city and regular descents into the dungeons to fight monsters falls on the shoulders of such a person. After listening to her, Evan noted that, as the second son, he had the right to choose his own path, and expressed his desire to become the captain of the Dungeon Knight Squad. He knew that this squad specialized in clearing dungeons and allowed him to form a personal team with the support of the Marquisate. Evan planned to gather a group of 7 potential demigod warriors who would develop in the dungeon environment so that he could take part in expeditions himself in the future. And, first of all, to protect his brother Eric from this dangerous mission. Realizing how important this announcement would be, he decided to inform his father of his decision as soon as possible in order to put an end to the rumors and make things easier for his brother. Meanwhile, Mabel said that Shine was training hard and was already enjoying the sympathy of the knights, and Beloit often disappeared somewhere, perhaps also training. Mabel admitted that she felt uneasy. She felt as if Beloit wanted to take her place. She asked Evan to talk to the girl, but he didn't know what he could tell her, since Beloit worked exclusively for him. In desperation, Mabel asked to join Evan's future squad. However, he refused. As the official representative of the pharmacy, she had to remain out of the dangers of the dungeons. The conversation was interrupted by bustling servants. Evan asked what was going on and was told that the Marquise's second wife, Miriam de Sheridan, had given birth to a daughter. This is how Evan's younger sister, a girl named Elizabeth, appeared in the family. He did not immediately realize the importance of this event, but he realized that the birth of a child would distract public attention from the discussion of the issue of succession. This means it will give him time to postpone the conversation with his father about his decision to become a knight. However, joy was mixed with anxiety. Evan remembered the plot of Demon Wars 3 well. In the game, the Marquis did not have a daughter. This discrepancy alarmed him. He began to wonder, had his own actions already begun to change the course of history? Or perhaps the girl really did exist but died long before the plot began. The thought of this haunted me. Mabel, noticing his thoughtfulness, tried to cheer the young man up, assuring him that he would always be in first place for her. The whole family celebrated Elizabeth's birth. For the first wife, this became a logical continuation of the family line after the birth of her eldest and youngest sons. For Miriam, it was the fulfillment of a long-held desire and relief from feelings of guilt towards her husband. She seemed genuinely happy. Evan remembered that in the game, it was this woman who played the role of the villain and became the cause of his death more than once. However, looking at her face full of joy and peace, he began to doubt. Perhaps fate could be changed. Evan shared his worries with Bernard. He was tormented by the thought of the possible imminent death of his newborn sister. He couldn't explain exactly where this premonition came from. Bernard was touched by the young man's sincere concern. He noted that even if the exact cause cannot be found, it is still possible to act proactively, eliminating potential threats. There had recently been a surge of energy in the city that had erupted from the underground, and although it had seemed to have been successfully suppressed, Bernard doubted that it had been that easy. Together with Evan and the knights, he went to inspect the streets. Soon the young man came across traces left by the goblin. They could not be confused with anything else. Bernard explained that goblin excrement could carry a special infection from the dungeons. The disease itself was not fatal, but when combined with other debilitating factors, it could be fatal, especially in infants. There was no cure for it. The environment, recently distorted by the flow of energy from the depths, became the perfect breeding ground for the spread of infection. Realizing the seriousness of the situation, Evan immediately ordered Knight Dane to convey to the Marquis that the child must be isolated from any contact with the outside world. At that moment, he was distracted by a scream. Turning around, he saw Servina running in, accompanied by frightened people. Her appearance surprised Evan, and Bernard asked who she was. Evan briefly introduced her as an acquaintance. Servina was in despair. The number of people falling ill was growing rapidly, and the church could not cope with the influx. Evan immediately went with her to the epicenter of the epidemic. The situation there was critical. The mutated disease was affecting people at a terrifying rate. Bernard carefully examined the patients and came to the conclusion that, despite the mutation, a cure could still be created. He ordered Evan to gather all the apothecaries in the city. Evan acted without delay. He announced that the disease must be stopped at the incubation stage and called on everyone who can help to join the fight. Pharmacists, shocked by the new threat, considered what was happening to be a disaster that could not be dealt with. However, Bernard confidently stated that he had already encountered similar cases during his travels and knew how to act. His expertise helped to identify the source of the infection, which became the key to containing it. Urgent work began. Pharmacies and the church have joined forces. Thanks to their work, the medicine was obtained in the shortest possible time. The Marquis took care to isolate the sick, and the infected areas were subjected to deep disinfection. Evan could finally breathe a sigh of relief. A catastrophe had been averted, albeit not without casualties. But the relief didn't last long. Mabel burst into the room. She said that little Lizzie was sick after all. Evan couldn't believe what he was hearing. Everything was done right. The medicine should have worked. But the disease still got to his sister. Nobody knew what to do. Doctors, pharmacists, priests, everyone was at a loss. The medicine had already been administered, but the newborn's body simply could not withstand it. She was too weak to live long enough for the potion to take effect. All eyes turned hopefully to Bernard. He thought for a moment and admitted, "There is one way. To artificially raise the level of the child's body, strengthening its vitality and resistance. However, this required rare ingredients that were not currently at hand." At that moment, Evan had an epiphany. He remembered his special glove. If you deal critical damage to a monster, bringing it to the brink of death, and then allow another to finish it off, all the experience gained will go to the last one who struck. This could work. He quickly organized everything necessary. He carefully put a glove on Lizzie, wrapped in a warm blanket. Then he moved her palm towards the dying slug. Squeezing her fingers, he directed the movement. The slug crumbled, and a strange sound was heard in the air, like a ringing bell, responding to the awakening of something new. Everyone held their breath. Lizzie, with a concentration unexpected for a baby, reached for the next slug again. One by one, they crumbled into glowing dust, and with each creature destroyed, the girl's condition improved. The unusual sounds that were made at the time of the murder attracted the Marcus's attention. He realized it was the same sound he had once heard from the amulet given to Evan. Now, everything fell into place. Bernard, smiling reservedly, admitted that Evan's method was risky, but incredibly effective. He praised the young man for his intelligence. Lizzie's mother, Miriam, hugged her daughter with tears in her eyes and thanked Evan for saving her child. Meanwhile, the disease, which came to be known as Welfin, continued to spread across the country like a plague, leaving a trail of death and suffering in its wake. But thanks to the efforts of Grandfather Bernard, Evan and the Brotherhood's pharmacists, many lives were saved. Bernard noticed that Evan had become too withdrawn and sullen after recent events. He reminded him that it was impossible to save everyone. It's important to focus on those you've already helped and not try to carry the entire burden of the world. And if one day there is no one left who is capable of fixing everything, then perhaps this world will truly deserve its destruction. Lizzie, having recovered, did not want to go into Eric's arms. She clung to Evan as if he were her personal hero. Smiling, Eric walked over and hugged them both without saying a word. Watching this scene, the Marquis silently walked over and called Evan over. He said he was proud of him. His son had saved not only Lizzie but the entire town, maybe the entire country. Still, he couldn't understand why Evan didn't want his exploits to be known. Maybe it was Eric. Then Evan decided it was time. He told his father that he had no claim to the title and that he had no intention of overshadowing his brother. His true desire is to lead a dungeon night squad. This news truly surprised the Marquis. The father, with unexpected gentleness, decided to support his son's desire to create his own nightly squad. However, as the true head of the House of Desjardins, he set a condition: to achieve real results. Evan gratefully agreed. He did not expect such easy support, and his heart was filled with joy. The Marquis also advised his son to come up with a name for the future squad, but Evan, with a slight smile, said that it already had one, and, it seemed, quite worthy. Later, Evan discussed everything with Bernard. He, as always, was aware of everything that was happening in the country. He said the king was impressed by Evan's efforts to combat Welfin's disease, and now plans to issue a decree to open pharmacies like the Brotherhood's throughout the country. Moreover, he expressed the assumption that the king himself might summon Father Evan to an audience. Bernard's words were soon confirmed. Father called Evan and said that they were going to the capital immediately. The king wanted to see him personally. Evan immediately became wary. He confessed to his father that he knew absolutely nothing about court etiquette. The Marquis replied with a grin. They would have enough time on the road to fix that. The journey to the capital was turbulent. Inner premonitions, the tension of anticipation, and the involuntary glances of those around him did not give the young man peace. What was especially alarming was that they were all heading towards the king, a man who in this world was practically a living god. Upon arriving in the capital and passing through the majestic gates of the castle, Evan refused the help of the servants. He walked next to his father, preoccupied with something completely different. As he walked, he shared his doubts. He had a strong feeling that something terrible had happened to Count Bayern's family. He felt that there was more than just an audience awaiting them. The Marquis listened to him attentively, but outwardly remained unperturbed. Although he pretended that he was hearing about it for the first time, inside he took his son's words seriously. He had long since learned to trust Evan's reasoning. The Bayern family, as Evan remembered from the game, had been wiped out before the events of Demon Wars 3, and any interference in their fate before that point could have had dangerous consequences. Soon, one of the courtiers approached them and announced that His Majesty the King was ready to receive them. The audience must take place immediately. Before arriving, the father addressed his son, revealing something personal to him for the first time. He revealed that their ancestor, the 13th Earl of Sheridan, was not only a noble warrior, but also the captain of a dungeon knight squad. It was thanks to his exploits that their family at one time received the title of Marquisate. After arriving in the capital, Evan and his father were immediately summoned to an audience with the Emperor. In the hall, Evan's father dropped to one knee, but the Emperor ordered him to rise and not observe formalities. Instead, he invited them to the table, expressing his appreciation for young Evan's achievements and his success in establishing the pharmacy. The Emperor proposed opening a similar institution in the capital. Evan suspected that the monarch was seeking to take credit for the initiative in order to prevent panic and bolster his reputation amid the threat of the spread of infection. He tried to object, pointing out the need for careful preparation, and his father supported him, pointing out the possible difficulties. However, the Emperor insisted, promising to take everything under personal control. Seeing his father under pressure, Evan wanted to support him. But soon, by order of the Emperor, the boy was sent to the garden. Unable to refuse, he left the palace and found himself in a well-kept, flower-filled inner garden. Left alone, he began training on slugs, continuing to level up, realizing how important strength would be in the events to come. During training, he was suddenly overcome by fear. Someone was watching. An unfamiliar girl with pink hair appeared in front of him, holding live worms in her hands. Evan found her both beautiful and frightening. For a while, he couldn't figure out who she was, but then he recognized her as Sirenelle Silklin, the Emperor's youngest daughter and one of the key figures in the game's 4th episode. He realized that their meeting had most likely been planned in advance by the Emperor himself. As the girl watched Evan destroy the slugs, she became curious about his actions, causing the boy to wonder about her true motives. He realized that in front of him was not just a child, but a potentially dangerous character who should be treated with extreme caution. The girl asked again why Evan was killing slugs. She said that they were asking not to harm them and did not understand why the boy was hurting them. Evan didn't know what to answer her. He realized that the girl was hearing the voices of creatures. The siren reported that the slugs' voices had disappeared, meaning that they were all dead. Evan remembered that according to the plot of the 4th part of the game, the princess was kidnapped by demons, and after brainwashing, she began to control monsters. At the time, he considered it part of the plot development. Now he realized that Siren originally had such abilities. She could subjugate creatures, but while she lived a peaceful life in the palace, she did not realize her power. That is why no one knew about her gift for a long time. Evan realized that he shouldn't lie to Siren about his powers. She had already seen him summon monsters. He explained that he does this for his own survival. By killing slugs, he evolves, becomes stronger, and gets a chance to stay alive. Siren accepted his explanation. She realized that the world was cruel and the boy was simply forced to do so. Then she asked to release at least one slug. Evan was surprised, but the girl explained that if he summoned one, it would not attack. At that moment, Evan's pendant flashed red. He suggested taking a walk to the fountain, as it could be dangerous here. The slug he summoned turned out to be fiery. Thanks to his training, Evan could now summon slimes with different abilities. Siren said it looked like a gemstone, so Evan decided to give it to her since the slug wouldn't listen anyway. The girl was happy. In her opinion, the slug was very cute. Evan tried to warn her about the danger, but she didn't believe him. He realized that if the slugs were starting to change, it meant that training would soon become more difficult. Siren said that Ruby, as she named the slug, had reported that many of his kind were incapable of thought. Evan was surprised by her words. The girl explained that most slugs act on one instinct, to attack everything that moves. Since they do not attack in self-defense, they are killed. When Evan asked who said it, Serena replied, "Ruby." She could read his mind. Evan explained that this ability was called a soul contract. If Siren wanted, she could develop this power simply by communicating with the slimes. She asked if it worked on worms. Evan said only monsters. He realized that now that the girl had made a contract with the slime, she would be able to develop her abilities and her domination power would increase. This will help her avoid future demon abductions. Evan said that he knew something about her gift and could tell her about it if she didn't mind. After meeting with the Emperor, Father told Evan that His Majesty wanted to arrange an engagement between him and the princess. Evan was totally against it. The servants were also surprised. The father reassured his son, saying that he had declined the offer for now, since he was still too young. However, he added that the conversation on this topic would be repeated. Evan found this strange. He realized that after the engagement, the Emperor would be able to access the pharmacy. However, the father assured that he was not interested in either the pharmacy or the city of the underground. The Emperor is interested in Evan himself, the boy who founded the Brotherhood's pharmacy and prevented an epidemic of an infectious disease. Now Evan realized that he had even more reasons to avoid meeting the princess. If the Emperor's plan succeeds, everyone will know that he is just a supporting character. He asked his father to inform the Emperor that he was unworthy of the princess's hand. The father understood that his son was not just saying this, but still asked him not to lie to himself. He asked Evan what he really thought. The boy didn't know what to answer. He remembered giving the princess Ruby, the one who was supposed to protect her. She finally admitted that she liked Evan as much as she liked worms. Evan was forced to admit that the rumors about the princess's beauty were true. Over time, she would become a real beauty. However, he still considered Beloit much more beautiful. He told his father that he could not understand what the princess was like and that her thoughts were a mystery to him. It was tiring for him. He would rather not get involved with her. His father asked him if he was sure of his decision. Evan replied that he did not want to meet the princess anymore. The father was delighted. He would not have dared to contradict the Emperor if he had known that his son was in love. The next 4 days were to be spent in negotiations regarding the Brotherhood's pharmacy. The Emperor asked to take Evan with him, but if he didn't want to, he could walk around the capital. Father promised to take care of everything himself. Evan was happy. He considered his father the best man in the world. The Marquis went to meet the king, leaving his son to entertain Princess Serena. He had previously promised that Evan would not have to see her again, but now he had suddenly abandoned him to his fate. The boy asked her discontentedly why she had come again. The girl answered with a smile that she wanted to play. Evan tried to explain that he didn't have time for that, but Serena insisted that since he was busy, she would go with him on business. It turned out that she had personally asked her father to let her spend the day with Evan, explaining that she liked him even more than worms. Evan was confused and asked if she had told her father about what had happened earlier. Serena nodded, but clarified that she had only mentioned the meeting in the garden and Ruby's discovery, leaving out other details. Then she noticed that Evan had very handsome servants. The boy hastened to warn that these were his close friends and asked not to offend them. He announced that they were going shopping today. They needed new clothes. Shine asked if they would buy outfits for them too. Beloit assured them that they would simply accompany Evan and return home. Serena, not wanting to be left behind, continued to insist on the game. Evan, realizing that it was too late to back out, agreed, but only on his own terms. The princess agreed to everything he said. They headed to Sigarge Island, one of the capital's trading pearls. The shops there were bright and rich, and the salespeople were delighted with the appearance of the princess herself. They were accompanied by friends, and Evan himself was already well recognized in the city thanks to rumors. The boy asked the saleswoman to select the best outfits for his companions, made from high-quality fabrics that would adapt to the owner's body. This meant that the shops used materials like in the game, adaptive and rare. Serena didn't immediately understand why she had to spend so much effort when she could change her clothes when they became too small. Evan explained that the items purchased here will preserve the memories of the big day. His words inspired the girl, and she suggested a trade. She would buy an outfit for him, and he would buy one for her. That way, they would have memorabilia associated with this day. Evan had no choice but to agree. Shine gratefully tried on his dark outfit. Evan noticed that he had chosen dark colors again. The boy noticed that their master preferred light-colored clothes, but Evan replied that blood was visible on light-colored clothes. Siren showed up in a cute dress and hopefully asked if Evan liked it. He admitted that the outfit was not bad and asked if she wanted to wear it today. The girl happily agreed. Belua came out next and she looked amazing. Evan was speechless but pulled himself together and admitted that it suited her very well. His heart almost stopped. Even Siren noticed that Belua was more beautiful than any worm. Coming from her lips, it sounded like the highest praise. The saleswoman thanked them for their visit. She was pleased to select outfits for such a group. Evan also had his eye on one more thing, a scarlet cape with an unusual design hanging at the entrance. She reminded him of an octopus. He asked that it be carefully packaged so that no one would know that it was he who bought it. Although the saleswoman didn't understand why Evan needed such a strange outfit, he knew. It was a magic cape that could summon a kraken from the depths of the sea. If you put it on in the open sea, the monster could drag the boat and everyone on it into the depths. It was for this very thing that they had set out on a trading expedition today. It was a hunt for artifacts that could one day save his life. The next stop on their route was a jewelry store. Evan was delighted. The capital store was significantly superior to the one in their hometown. He didn't even expect that there would be so many exquisite and truly beautiful things here. Shine was surprised to notice that this was the first time he had seen Evan act like a typical vain aristocrat. To this, Evan reminded with a grin that he could hear everything. Shine just shrugged. Now their master could afford it. The Brotherhood's pharmacy began to bring in income. And in addition, the Marquis also generously allocated funds to the young master for his personal needs. Evan said he had a lot more shopping planned, but first he decided it was time to have lunch. They headed towards a majestic building that knocked Shine out of the water. It looked like a luxurious estate, but in reality it was an elite cafe. Evan confirmed that the building was indeed converted from a real palace. Shine worriedly reminded them that the princess was with them and suggested finding a more respectable establishment. However, Evan insisted on this particular cafe. He needed to get there. They were greeted with respect. The visitors watched the incoming company with interest, whispering and wondering who they were. Some recognized Evan, calling him the Chardon family's greatest treasure. He asked to be taken to a separate room. The manager noted doubtfully that this room was not usually offered to distinguished guests, but Evan insisted, paying extra for its rent. Moreover, he ordered that a neighboring room be allocated for the accompanying knights, also at his own expense. The manager immediately gave the order, prepare the premises and set the table with the best dishes and cutlery. When everything was ready, the company began to eat. There were a variety of dishes on the table, aromatic and exquisite. Shine and Beloit looked at the food with curiosity. They had never tried anything like it before. Evan asked Serena if she liked the food. She replied that it was quite good. At this time, Shine complained that the room was cold. Evan just smiled mysteriously and told Shine and Beloit to watch him closely and repeat his actions. He picked up a knife and fork, warning that he would be strict for mistakes at the table, even to the point of being exiled. Serena found it all funny. Evan continued. First soup. A minute later, salad with bread, then fish. Another minute pause, and only then steak. Finally, dessert and a cup of Earl Grey. Shine ate carefully as if he was afraid of something. Evan noticed this and asked if the food had spoiled the mood. But Shine explained that it wasn't the food that was the problem, but the fact that he felt a strange presence all the time, as if someone was watching them. Evan calmly informed them that there was no need to be afraid. Those present would not cause any harm until the meal was over. And at that moment, a ghost appeared. She thanked everyone for the treat, admitted that she was full, and said that she was now going to sleep. After that, she disappeared. Evan happily reported that the event is over. Shine didn't understand what he was talking about, and Evan was confused. He was using a term from the game out of habit. He then explained that there was indeed a ghost in the room, and their visit had helped to calm his soul. As a token of gratitude, the spirit bestowed a blessing on all those present. Serena asked worriedly if it was dangerous. Evan assured her that it was actually beneficial, and in confirmation of his words, everyone felt a surge of strength. After the meal, they returned to the estate. Evan asked Beloit to close the door. It was time to look at their new treasures. He was delighted with his catch. He managed to collect rare artifacts, familiar to him from the first part of the game War of Demons. The young man didn't even hope that he would be able to find them in reality. Serena asked with interest what artifacts were. Evan explained that these were jewels with magical properties. Balua noted that such valuable things should not be simply placed on the tablecloth, but Evan assured her that the artifacts were able to protect themselves and were not in any danger. Serena was surprised that such rare items could be bought in a regular jewelry store. Evan explained that many simply do not understand their true value. Some things have not even awakened as artifacts yet. Others have long been forgotten because their powers were not understood. There were also some that required mana to be fed in order to unlock their potential. Selena mentioned that they have a mage in the palace who controls artifacts, and so she is used to seeing such things on a daily basis, without even knowing that they are artifacts. Jewelers, in turn, might not understand what treasures they had in their hands and accidentally sell unique items for next to nothing. She was intrigued by how Evan was able to recognize artifacts among ordinary jewelry. Evan honestly admitted that he remembered every artifact that had ever appeared in the game. His knowledge turned out to be surprisingly useful. Selena was eager to try on one of the pieces of jewelry. Evan stopped her, noting that these were someone else's things and she shouldn't act frivolously. The girl, being a little capricious, suggested an exchange. If he gave her one artifact, she would bring another in return, from the Imperial Palace. Having promised to do it personally, she gave her word. Evan agreed, but only for one artifact. Hearing that the princess would bring him something from the palace, he could not refuse. He reminded her that promises must be kept, and Serena clarified, this was not a deal at all, but an exchange of gifts and the creation of memories, as he himself once said. When he handed her the pendant called Triumph of the Tiger, something strange happened. The pendant reacted to Siren, although it had never shown such a reaction before. Its properties have changed and become different. Siren explained that her abilities had now been strengthened. Apparently, the artifact had recognized her as its owner. She was beaming with joy. After that, Evan told what artifact he wanted to receive in return. The Siren had to find out if he was in the palace and not in the house she lived in. Evan emphasized that the girl should not forget about it. The girl assured that she would definitely fulfill her promise, even if she had to get her father's imperial sword. Evan reassured her with a smile. The artifact she needed was much simpler. Evening came and Serena went home. She promised to get what he needed and see him tomorrow. Evan understood that the artifact he desired was not of great value and therefore should not arouse any suspicion. The Emperor will give it to his daughter without a doubt if she asks. After the princess left, Evan suggested picking out a gift for Balua. The girl was surprised. She had never even dreamed of such a thing. Besides, she thought that there was a deal between him and Selena and didn't want to interfere. But Evan was quick to reassure. This is not a deal, just a gift. He wanted to give her the Volcano Breath earrings, which enhance mana recovery and flame magic. Beloit tried to refuse. The jewelry was too valuable, and she believed that she could not wear the same thing as her master. After all, Evan had the opposite pair of these earrings. Evan insisted, and eventually the girl accepted the gift. As a token of her gratitude, she allowed herself to be called simply Lua. The next day was supposed to be the start of a new relic hunt, but Evan noticed that Shine looked sick. He asked worriedly if everything was okay with him. Shine confessed that after meeting the ghost the day before, he lost consciousness and since then he felt something strange. Outwardly, he resembled a man who had gone through a war, only to return and learn of his beloved's betrayal. The strange comparison just came out of Evan's mouth, highlighting the extent of his anxiety. Shine asked in confusion why this particular comparison was chosen, but Evan quickly got to the main point. He was worried about his friend's condition. The young man complained of a constant cold that did not go away even under the sun, and of anger that gripped his body, as if a storm were raging inside. Evan suggested that after contact with the spirit, he could have received a blessing, but Shine himself doubted it. To somehow ease his condition, Evan suggested trying on artifact bracelets that enhance agility and speed. In the future, they could be used to reach the depths of dungeons up to level 60, whereas at present only up to level 45 has been explored. The effect was immediate. As he moved, an unnatural shadow was cast behind Shine. The guy insisted that he hadn't done anything special, but then the ghost appeared again. Evan tried to drive it out, but the spirit wouldn't go away. He explained that he had been asleep for a long time, but that he had awakened next to Shine, and now he was unable to disappear. Shine tried to get rid of it in an irritated manner, considering the ghost to be the source of strange sensations and weakness, but the spirit assured him otherwise. Looking at the bracelets, the ghost suddenly found comfort in them. He suggested settling inside the artifact, believing that then both the cold and the disturbing sensations would disappear. Shine finally agreed, despite Evan's attempts to dissuade him. At that moment, the spirit joyfully merged into the artifact. Only then did Evan realize that he had become a participant in an event from the fourth part of the game, previously unknown to him. It turns out that the ghost bracelets were intended from the very beginning to be a receptacle for a spirit. This discovery opened up new perspectives for him. Most likely, the artifact will evolve along with the spirit, becoming stronger with each stage, and therefore becoming especially valuable. Shine himself hadn't felt any changes yet, but Evan advised him to focus on the possible benefits. Meanwhile, the spirit felt great. He was delighted. He finally had a home, and a very nice neighbor too. The awkward moment was interrupted by the princess. She came in, announced that everything was ready, and asked about the plans for the day. Evan quickly asked Shine not to divulge information about the spirit. Siren handed him the promised box with the artifact she was supposed to bring, an item that required completing a long chain of quests on behalf of the Imperial family in the third part of the game. The blade was kept in the palace for years, but no one understood how to use it. Now Evan was about to demonstrate it. His unique ability allowed him to remove restrictions, any imposed on artifacts. The princess asked in surprise what kind of restrictions were being discussed, but received no answer. Evan was already busy. By removing the limits, he was able to equip not 5, but 6 artifacts at once, a critical step for someone who risks his life every second, even with strong protection. All those present watched what was happening with interest. Then the chains on Evan's gloves disappeared, revealing their full power. Shine asked his master what had happened. Evan explained that the artifact had enhanced his equipment, but now he would need new items. The princess realized this first and immediately said it out loud. The young man nodded, but seeing the girl's fatigue, he suggested that she return to the palace. The coming day promised to be especially difficult. However, the princess refused and went further with him. She noticed that today he was spending much more modestly than the day before. In 4 hours, they managed to visit the library, the forge, several clothing stores, and even a workshop. Evan admitted that it would take a whole day to do a proper shopping spree, but he had almost no energy left. Serena looked much more cheerful than the others, as if the day was just beginning. He wondered, perhaps the artifact he had given her really did increase her stamina. When she asked where they were going next, Evan suggested grabbing a bite to eat. There was a place he knew nearby. This surprised Shane, who was sure that the young gentleman was in the capital for the first time. Evan didn't go into detail. The place was called the Friendly Fist. Hearing this name from their master, even the guards looked at each other in surprise. The young man assured them that the place was well-known and well-known. In fact, he remembered the place very well from his gaming experience. In such establishments, players usually found allies, received rare tasks, or witnessed key events. The Fist was exactly that, a significant hub in both Demon Wars Part 2 and Part 3. Regular characters often appeared here. Among them is the Silent Knight, a fan favorite whose appearance in the story always meant that something important was about to happen. Shine was the first to ask if the establishment served alcohol. Evan reassured him. There were adults with them, Dane and the accompanying knights. They, hearing the question, confirmed with a smile that they had heard about the menu of this place. But the purpose of their visit was not only gastronomic. This establishment was famous for the fact that the best mercenaries from all over the empire flocked here. On Dane's orders, the knights went incognito, disguised as mercenaries, and kept their guard up. The atmosphere was tense and the local visitors were hot-tempered. As soon as the group entered, they were immediately noticed, with the princess receiving particular attention. Evan, without losing his cool, ordered a large table and asked for 7 servings of the signature dish. Shine noticed that there was literally a sense of power in the air. The gentleman confirmed. It was here that the strongest fighters of the empire gathered. Balua asked anxiously why they needed to be in such a dangerous place. The answer was simple. He was looking for treasure, not an object, but a person. Repeating this 3 times, he gave the words an almost incantatory power. He knew who he was looking for. To calm his companion, Evan reminded them that they were guarded by knights, and they would not allow any harm to happen. Shine, watching what was happening, noticed that Evan was calling Beloit by a pet name. This nickname had obviously appeared recently, and now it sounded especially affectionate coming from Serena, who immediately wanted to call the girl Lua. Beloit politely but gently declined. Soon the food arrived. The dish was unusual for the princess, but it looked incredibly appetizing. Evan invited everyone to the table. The knights began to eat with enthusiasm, and Evan himself enjoyed the moment. Not the taste, but the opportunity. Once upon a time, he could only watch such scenes from the monitor screen, but it was too early to relax. He came here with a goal, to find one of the key characters. Looking around the room, he still did not see the one he was looking for. Anxiety appeared in my soul. There was little time left. In 2 days they had to leave the capital, and only tomorrow was there a chance for a last attempt. Suddenly, his gaze caught on a familiar figure. The priest's robe immediately gave him away as the same one, Ryan Drukas. In the past, Unbreakable Shield, one of the most difficult bosses of the 4th part of the game. He never attacked, but blocked blows with frightening consistency, regenerating health. Defeating him was considered a real achievement, even if the reward was small. The fact that he was now sitting with a mug of cheap booze looked strange. Even the guards recognized him. In his youth, he became famous for his divine power, and later became a knight, choosing the path of a priest. The princess, noticing the expression on Evan's face, quietly encouraged him. The same fire that had lit up the young man's eyes on the day of their first meeting. He walked confidently to the bar, politely asked if he could sit down, and turned on all his charm. A lot depended on this conversation. Ryan reacted with surprise to the appearance of such a noble young man. Evan introduced himself, took his time with questions, and didn't make any sudden moves. While he didn't know why the future captain of the Order of the Holy Knights was spending his evenings in a cheap tavern, getting drunk, he saw no reason not to try to start a conversation. He understood that if a hunter wanted to get closer to his target, he had to first show compassion for his prey. During the conversation, Ryan revealed that on the day he received his blessing, he made a vow to himself to become a holy knight and go to war for the gods. He sought to prove his devotion and earn even more divine power. It was this desire that became the essence of his gift. Evan remembered the plot of the game. If everything was as Ryan described, then since childhood the young man had a huge supply of mana. He was trained by a former aristocrat who came from abroad, but despite his efforts, Ryan was unable to grasp the basics of magic. The mentor advised him to switch to the path of a priest. Fate changed only once when he tried to protect another. At that moment, a blessing descended upon him. However, Ryan himself continued to complain about life. Among the many types of weapons, he did not find a single one that suited him. He lacked talent, not only for fighting, but also for using weapons. One by one, his mentors abandoned him. However, Evan saw something more in him. There was determination behind the desperation. He asked Ryan what the power he carried within himself was called. The answer was simple: the blessing of the protector, a gift that only those who are able to sacrifice themselves for others receive. This power warped the enemy's attention. They always sought to attack only Ryan, as if the rest of the world had disappeared for them. This happened again and again, with a frightening inevitability. Evan realized that it was this very feature that made the joint quest with Ryan in the game so difficult. Compared to him, he himself seemed like just a lucky survivor. Only now did he realize how rare and valuable such a gift was. Not for attack, but for defense. But Ryan couldn't see it. He continued to be burdened by his destiny, trapped in regret. The young man did not understand why he did not have powerful fighting skills. He was tormented by the question of how he had ended up in such a pitiful position. A knight without a sword, without strength, without the ability to protect others. Evan tried to convince him otherwise. He said Ryan's gifts weren't meant for fighting, but that didn't make them any less valuable. These powers were given to him to save. Ryan confessed how he did it. He attracted the monster's attention, distracting them from the unarmed, and ran until he had no breath left. He ran until his lungs ached, until he was exhausted, just so that others would be safe. But to Ryan himself it seemed pathetic. Evan, however, had a different opinion. According to him, there was real courage in making a sacrifice, knowing you couldn't fight back, and then charging forward anyway. This act was enough to call Ryan a hero. It was the first time in his life that he had heard such words. No one had ever called him a hero before. Evan noticed the knight's shoulders straighten. His gaze became more confident. His words had hit their mark. The plan was starting to work. He expressed confidence that Ryan would one day become a great holy knight. But instead of gratitude, he heard something unexpected. Ryan calmly said that he no longer strives for this. Evan was surprised. He didn't expect such an answer. Ryan explained that after their conversation, he had rethought a lot of things. The desire to become a knight had never been his own. He chased other people's dreams, other people's expectations. And now, he just wants to protect. Not for the titles, not for the glory, just because he decided so. Evan realized that everything was going even better than he had expected. He introduced himself again, this time as an equal. And Ryan, a little embarrassed, responded in kind. Hearing the name, Evan shared his plans. He said that he belonged to the Desjardins house, and very soon he would have to gather a detachment for an expedition into the dungeon. He invited Ryan to join. At first, he considered himself unworthy, but having overcome his doubts, he eventually agreed. Evan's friends watched the events unfold with interest. Later, the boy's father was amazed. He did not understand when his son managed to collect so many artifacts. For Evan, It was obvious that the time spent in the capital was not wasted. He obtained exactly the treasures he had originally planned to obtain, and which he believed would one day help him survive. These things, he said, would become the foundation for the future order. The son's words surprised the father. It was scary to even imagine what kind of person Evan would grow up to be if he already thought so big. His maturity and prudence went beyond the normal thinking of a young man. Looking around, the father noticed another young man in the room. Evan introduced Ryan, the future knight of his order. He has even already allocated funds to buy him out of his former order. The father realized that his son not only thought ahead, but also accepted the responsibility that is usually borne by an adult man, the head of the family. When all the business in the capital was completed, Evan realized that there was one more important meeting left. Farewell to Serena. The girl, feeling separation, asked if she could go with him. But Evan explained that he was leaving the capital forever. He wished her luck and asked her to take care of herself and continue training. Serena noticed that his words sounded like a final farewell. Evan didn't deny it. He really hoped they wouldn't meet again. However, the girl promised that she would train hard in order to one day join his order. He doubted her seriousness, but she, on the contrary, took everything to heart. Siren said that one day when he became stronger, he would be able to call her affectionately Ray. Evan secretly hoped that the girl would meet a worthy man on her way, and that she would be engaged to him before she left her native palace. They left the capital. Ryan soon realized that the path Evan had chosen would be full of dangers. Shine confirmed it. Every corner was a threat. Such is the price of the ability to honor the hidden laws of the world. Ryan had to protect his master. If something happens to Evan, the dream of creating a dungeon order will disappear. He took this task with complete seriousness. Even outside the city, he was willing to take action to protect the one who gave him a new meaning in life. However, Evan noted that such sacrifices would not be required for now. He reminded that Ryan did not even have combat skills. This hurt the young man. He felt useless. But Evan didn't mean to humiliate him at all. He was simply stating a fact. Ryan was indeed not very good at fighting, but he had no equal in defense. The problem was that Ryan himself didn't understand how he could protect someone without owning a weapon. Evan explained that you don't always have to attack to defend. All that remained was to find a weapon that suited his characteristics. Ryan immediately understood what was being talked about. It was about the shield. He remembered how in the past, during combat training, it was his ability to distract enemies and take the hits himself that saved the team. For large-scale battles, such skills were invaluable. Ryan had previously tried not to remember that day, which he considered his shame. Then he ran away without even trying to fight back. Since then, the young man unsuccessfully searched for a weapon that would give him strength and allow him to fight. But Evan's words changed everything. He realized that he didn't need to attack at all. His path lay in defense. If he learns to control the shield, he will be able to protect others. Evan was genuinely pleased with Ryan's realization. After all, if someone on the team can withstand blows, the rest will be able to attack. He realized that together they could be the perfect team. The Unbreakable Shield, the Silent Knight, and the Crimson Witch. Even the final boss from the past life wouldn't dare to go up against them if he saw such a trio. Evan had managed to assemble a dream team, but this was no longer a game. It was reality, based on the same laws. His path required not just strategy, but living decisions. Ryan was surprised to hear Evan say, "we." He believed that he would also take part in the battles. After all, he was the commander of the order. However, Shine saw no point in their leader risking himself. Belua also believed that Evan should not engage in battles. He could rely on his comrades. Evan himself believed that he should participate, albeit in a different way. It was not in vain that he studied with the old alchemist Bernard. This knowledge could be useful in the dungeons. Ryan was amazed to hear that such high arts were still taught somewhere. Evan confirmed that he had indeed found a teacher, and he turned out to be truly talented. With such allies in preparation, he felt confident. Soon they arrived in a city famous for its hot springs. It was located at the foot of the dormant volcano Meganot and had been popular since the first part of the game. None of them had been to such places before. Not Ryan, not Beloit, not even Shine. Evan's father simply asked if his son could handle the hot water, to which he replied with a smile that the hotter it was, the stronger the effect. He was looking forward to the vacation. Even in his past life, he loved hot springs and didn't want to miss this chance. Father hoped that everyone would enjoy their stay at the hot spring. In places like these, it didn't matter what your title was, but gender was strictly separated. Belua went to the women's section, albeit with obvious displeasure. Shine tried to console her. but to no avail. After checking into the rooms, everyone was surprised to see Evan. He was going to go to the springs with the Marquis, but before that he decided to rest a little and visit the team. Shine guessed that he had come for a reason. Evan said that there was a dungeon located not far from the city. Small and seemingly insignificant, they didn't even surround it with city walls because it arose naturally. However, he was not going to go there yet. His companions were not strong enough. However, he wanted to get an important point across. There were only 3 truly great dungeons in the world: Chardon in Silk Lane, Mana Road in Ferrati, and Murden on the other continent. Cities grew up around them, and it was in these places that blessings could be received. There were also smaller dungeons, medium and small, but they did not provide such gifts. Only the dungeons of the cities allowed this. The Hot Springs dungeon was special. Its high difficulty made it inaccessible to most. It was only needed for cleansing, so that the monsters would not break through to the people. But Evan's interest lay elsewhere. He was interested in something else. There was a source of reverse mana flow nearby. Rare artifacts, sometimes fragments of the dungeons themselves, were collected around such places. It was this source that he wanted to take and transfer to their city. They went down to the source. Locals and travelers enjoyed spending time there, including Evan's father. Shine was nervous. The hot water scared him. He was afraid of pain. Evan tried to encourage his friend, but he was adamant. He was not going to dive under any circumstances. Then Evan, unable to bear it any longer, simply pushed him into the water. Shine screamed in fear, sure that his skin would burn. But after a few seconds, he realized that the water was not that hot at all. On the contrary, swimming turned out to be pleasant. The pain in my body subsided, the fatigue dissipated, and my health became noticeably better. Evan explained that water not only has a relaxing effect, but also a healing effect, which is why it is so beneficial after a workout. Shine asked if it would be possible to set up such a source in their city. The idea seemed quite reasonable to Evan. The father watched his son with interest. He increasingly realized how wise and thoughtful Evan was, despite his age. After bathing, they changed into local traditional clothes. Evan didn't know her origins. There was no mention of it in the game. Ryan noticed that the outfit was somewhat reminiscent of clothing from his home area, which gave Evan something else to think about. At that moment, Belua called out to them. Evan turned around and was momentarily speechless. She stood in traditional dress and her beauty was dazzling. But someone else followed her. A young man with an arrogant posture. Evan recognized him immediately. Crow von Ferrati, one of the key secondary characters in the game, the eldest son of a noble family. From an early age, he was distinguished by arrogance and unscrupulousness. Crow tried to flirt with Beloit, but she was irritated. She made it clear that she was not interested in him and reminded him that she already had a young master. However, Crow was not going to give up and continued to pester her until a firm male voice was heard. It was Evan's father. His appearance made Crow retreat. He introduced himself and tried to justify himself, stating that Beloit was a rare beauty, and perhaps that was why he had overdone it with his attention. Evan's father agreed that the girl was indeed extraordinarily beautiful, but still asked a direct question. Was he pestering her? Crow was quick to assure that he had behaved with dignity. Evan watched from the side. He knew that Crow, despite his status as a minor character, was extremely dangerous. A skilled swordsman, Evan had a high chance of dying in the game, especially if he fought someone like Crow. So he decided not to interfere and let his father handle the situation. Only after that did he approach Beloit, make sure that she was okay, and try to cheer her up, explaining Crow's behavior by the fact that she was too beautiful. The girl was clearly embarrassed, but she was flattered by his words. Meanwhile, Crow watched their interaction. His gaze turned cold as he saw Beloit talking animatedly to Evan. He demanded to know who was in front of him. The father introduced his son. A silent but tense contact was established between the young men. Suddenly, Crow straightened his shoulders and announced he had an idea. He was issuing a challenge, a duel for Beloit. Crow wasn't going to back down. He told Evan's father so directly. He admitted that such determination was worthy of respect, although he did not approve of the very idea of a duel. Nevertheless, he gave his consent with one condition: no magic, no weapons, only hand-to-hand combat. Evan was stunned. He had hoped that his father would side with him and forbid the fight, but things turned out differently. Now all he had to do was accept the challenge. He understood that there was almost no chance. Crow trained in hand-to-hand combat from an early age. He was stronger, faster, more confident, and his role in this world was much more significant. Evan felt like a secondary character, and therefore especially vulnerable. However, looking at Beloit, he realized that he had no choice. Crow, watching his opponent closely, noticed how a strange energy enveloped him. He had never seen anything like this before, but he wasn't going to underestimate the boy. Having broken ahead, he was the first to go on the attack. Evan watched as Crow approached, and suddenly noticed something strange. His movement seemed slow, like in water. It wasn't up to the level that Crow should have been capable of. Evan easily dodged the blow. Those around gasped. Evan was moving at incredible speed. Feeling strangely confident, he decided to strike back lightly. The blow wasn't very strong, but Crow flew back a few meters and fell without moving. There was silence. Evan didn't understand what had happened. He hadn't intended to hit for real. However, Crow did not rise. The people looked at the young man in a daze. Evan's father solemnly declared him the winner of the duel. Evan stood there, confused. He couldn't believe it was over so quickly, much less that he had won. It seemed impossible. The only logical explanation he considered was Crow's lack of training, despite his magical potential. But the father was sure that the victory was the result of Evan's own hidden abilities. That meant that he really had power. Evan himself had a hard time accepting this fact. He couldn't believe that a minor character like him was stronger than one of the central characters. Meanwhile, Crow was being brought back to his senses. Ryan used healing magic, and soon the boy regained consciousness. Shine, watching what was happening, admitted, Evan doesn't even suspect his true capabilities. And the commander of the military detachment had previously noted his unusual abilities. At this time, Belua approached Evan. She had a handkerchief in her hands. The guy didn't immediately understand its purpose. She explained that she wanted to wipe the sweat from his forehead. But the fight ended so quickly that he didn't even have time to speak. Beloit praised Evan for his bravery and extraordinary strength. He was filled with joy, not only from the victory, but also from the fact that he had impressed her. He decided not to think too long and just allow himself to be happy that he was able to win. Crow could hardly hide his disappointment at the defeat. But Evan, noticing this, decided to encourage his opponent. He noted that he had fought with dignity, and perhaps luck had simply not been on his side this time. These words noticeably lifted Crow's spirits. He said with a smile that he would definitely challenge Evan to a duel again, this time with full force. Evan was taken by surprise. He did not expect such a turn of events and refused, citing the lack of a reason for another duel. However, Crow replied that he had such a reason, and, having become stronger, he would definitely return. Evan was overcome with anxiety. He had no idea that a simple trip to the hot springs would end with him gaining a new enemy. Shine, noticing how much this had shaken his master, promised that in the event of another duel he would take his place. This thought calmed Evan somewhat. Soon the father approached his son and reminded him that since the Von Ferrati family was present at the springs, they should come up and greet Meltor, the head of the family. Evan tried to refuse, but his father insisted. They visited their friends. Meltor was genuinely pleased to meet them, and the men exchanged warm greetings. Evan's father even complimented Meltor's wife. They also paid attention to Evan, noticing how he had matured and become quite an attractive young man. Soon they mentioned their daughter, Alicia, who was the same age as Evan. A girl came out from behind her father, and Evan immediately recognized her. Standing before him was the game's main character, the one who had been the cause of his numerous deaths in the past. Evan's father, noticing his reaction, decided that his son was simply embarrassed. But in reality, the boy was overcome with fear. Everything that was happening was too reminiscent of the plot of the game. Meltor casually reminded them that their children were engaged, and according to the agreement, were to get married in the future. Evan's father had forgotten about it himself. But for Evan, it sounded like a death sentence. The events leading up to his character's death in the game's plot came to mind. Alicia lived in Chardon until the main character appeared. Feelings developed between them, and soon she chose him over Evan. Abandoned and humiliated, Evan de Chardin committed suicide. The young man remembered his guilt very well. Despite the engagement, he flirted with other girls and Alicia noticed it. She couldn't trust him. Maybe that's why Evan in this world now avoided her and kept away from her. After the meeting, the father asked his son if he liked the springs. He answered in the affirmative but mentioned an unpleasant meeting. Then the father suggested repeating the bath after dinner. But Evan, not wanting to stay near the Faraday family any longer, suggested creating similar springs in their city. Remembering his son's behavior and his obvious embarrassment when communicating with the girl, the father wondered if he was experiencing anxiety or even fear of members of the opposite sex. Father listened to Evan's idea with surprise. He didn't immediately understand what his son was talking about. Creating his own hot spring seemed impossible to him. However, Evan reminded us of the existing theory of dungeons. If a powerful artifact or monster appears nearby, then a dungeon may appear in that place. A powerful magician could also cause the same phenomenon. This was the very feature he was going to use. The boy asked his father to trust him, assuring him that he already had a plan. At night, together with his friends, he went in search. Shine, although he doubted success, still helped by digging in the indicated places. He asked if his master was sure that anything could be found at all. Evan didn't hesitate to confirm. He knew the place they needed was somewhere around here. Sure enough, after a while, Ryan came across a massive stone slab. He called Evan over, asking if it was the same artifact. Evan recognized the find without hesitation. This was the slab that could help them. It was better for them to have it than to continue to lie on the ground for hundreds of years. The next day they returned home. The stone slab was carefully unloaded. Then Evan and his father headed to the boy's older brother, Eric. The father asked him to listen to the younger one, because now they had to work together. Evan laid out the plan. They needed a large plot of land, close to the pharmacy and not far from the main road leading to the dungeon. He proposed to create one large source capable of generating profit. Unlike the pharmacy, which was aimed at the poor, the spring was meant to attract wealthy knights, those who explored the dungeons. These people were willing to pay generously for a quick recovery so they could get back to their mission as soon as possible. Eric was impressed. His younger brother had thought of everything down to the last detail. To create the source, they turned to Garcia's grandfather, an experienced alchemist. He was surprised. All this time he wondered what Evan and his father were doing in the capital, but it turned out that they were making plans to open the source. Evan showed him the slab, and Garcia examined it carefully. According to him, the artifact itself was not strong enough to form a dungeon, but something could be done about it, and he was ready to help. Evan was delighted, but the alchemist made a condition. The source must be available to the pharmacy employees free of charge. Evan readily agreed. Eric, watching what was happening, never ceased to be amazed. Where did his younger brother get so many brilliant ideas from? Later, Evan asked his father to allocate some more land near the future spring. The father asked in surprise why he needed her. Evan explained that the site would house his fraternity's training headquarters. Everything was going perfectly. The knights would recover in the source and then return to training with renewed vigor. The stronger his squad becomes, the more reliable the defense will be. And therefore, Evan's own chances of survival will increase. Evan personally supervised the construction of the hot spring. The work was in full swing, and he closely monitored every stage. While giving instructions to the contractors, he asked them to be especially careful with one of the columns, which had important symbols engraved on it. Damage to this column would mean that everything would have to start over. He felt proud. He was creating a new location that was not in the original game. Crowds of curious onlookers had already gathered nearby, not understanding what exactly was being built there. A pharmacy was already operating in the area, but the purpose of the new construction remained a mystery. Later, Evan discussed the progress of the work with the alchemist Garcia. He reported that the power of one plate would not be enough to maintain stable magical activity of the source. Strengthening was needed. Rare artifacts with magical properties. Unfortunately, Garcia once had some of these, but he sold them a long time ago. Evan calmed the old man down and showed him the artifacts brought from the capital. Garcia was amazed. This boy combined knowledge, determination, and incredible foresight. With the new materials, they were able to continue working, and Evan had another opportunity to hone his alchemy skills. He was soon to have training with the captain. He immediately noticed how busy Evan was and asked him not to neglect his studies. In his opinion, the boy had exceptional abilities that could not be missed. The captain also said that he had mastered a new technique in the dungeon and wanted to teach it to Evan. He had already heard from Shine about his victory in the duel and was sure that now there would be many who wanted to fight him. Evan did not share the captain's enthusiasm. He hoped that there would be as few such people as possible. Despite his fatigue, he complied. The technology could be useful in the future. The day was exhausting. In the morning, etiquette lessons, then construction supervision, later, alchemical experiments with Bernard, and finally, training with the captain. Evan felt very tired. At that moment, Mabel entered the room. Her face expressed obvious displeasure. Evan asked what happened, and the girl, holding back her emotions, noted that upon returning from the capital, he brought gifts for Shine and Beloit, but forgot about her. Evan actually forgot. He immediately handed Mabel the pendant. She was sincerely delighted with such a generous gift. He hoped that this would settle the situation, hoping that her feelings would gradually cool down. But this did not happen. Evan's schedule was truly grueling. Even after all the training, he still had one more training session ahead of him, controlling slugs. Now he could summon 2 creatures on each hand. But this time he suddenly felt ill. He felt that his mana level had dropped sharply due to the strong physical and mental stress. Evan realized that the construction of the source had to be completed as soon as possible. This was the only way to maintain his power. And yet, even in this intense rhythm, there was one place where he could find solace: in Lizzie's arms. His sister was a source of joy for him in this difficult world. The technique the captain showed Evan was called Heaven's Power. The young man quickly mastered it and demonstrated outstanding results, which greatly surprised his mentor. The captain had long suspected that Evan had hidden fighting talent, but he had no idea that he would be able to pass on such complex technology to someone else. He himself was not sure that this was possible, but he believed in Evan's potential, and he was not mistaken. Later, Beloit approached them. She wiped the sweat from Evan's forehead and reminded him that he had more work to do. The long-awaited moment was approaching: the opening of the hot spring. Evan had to personally verify its functionality and healing properties and check whether everything was prepared properly. Together with his friends, he headed inside the building. The first to be impressed was Shine. He did not expect such beauty and scope. Stein's famous spring was decorated in an Asian style, but Evan decided to go a different route, choosing Western traditional architecture. Many elements seemed unfamiliar to his companions. Shine pointed to the strange object and asked what it was. Evan explained that it was a drink machine. You just inserted a coin, selected what you wanted from a list, and the machine would dispense a drink. Among other things, there was also a glass of cold milk. This is what Evan always drank after a hot shower. It became a kind of ritual for him. He could not refuse. Bernard also made his contribution. He added special healing herbs to the spring water. Now it emanated a soft, pleasant aroma, and its regenerative properties were enhanced. Everyone was eagerly awaiting the moment to test the source for themselves. A massive artifact kept it functioning, and everything that surrounded them now was Evan's idea. His ideas given form and life. The young men did not hesitate. They rushed to the water and immediately felt the effect. Fatigue subsided, the body was filled with strength. Everyone was amazed. The source really worked. Even Garcia, the old alchemist, was hailed as a wizard, but he just waved it off. He knew that all the glory belonged to Evan. Still, Garcia mentioned the problem. Evan became wary and asked what was going on. It turned out that a crowd of hunters had gathered at the entrance to the establishment. They were striking against the established fee: 20 silver coins for visiting the spring. For comparison, you could live for almost a week for that money. The price seemed exorbitant to many. Those who explored the dungeons were especially protesting. In their opinion, the fee should be reduced. But Evan didn't pay much attention to it. He was sure that there would be someone who would agree to pay. After all, the opportunity to quickly recover and return to the dungeon was worth that kind of money. And as soon as rumors about the miraculous properties of the spring spread throughout the city, there will be more and more people wanting to use it. Everything happened exactly as Evan planned. The first strongest warriors immediately headed towards its source. Rumors about its healing properties and unusual effect spread throughout the city, and every day the number of people wanting to experience the miracle only grew. Those who could not afford such luxury saved money, dreaming of one day stepping into warm water that could restore strength and healing. The first of the guilds to use the source were the Fighters of the Golden Drake. They regained their strength and were soon ready to head into the next dungeon, trying to overtake their competitors. The others looked after them with admiration, dreaming of the day when they could follow their example. Evan's father was shocked. The profit from the source was many times greater than the revenue from even 4 pharmacies combined. And although he was surprised, Evan understood his reaction. The profits were truly enormous. The father added that many people expressed a desire to invest in the project, hoping to get their share. However, he immediately explained to them. He himself had not invested a single silver coin. Everything that surrounded them now was the result of Evan's efforts. All the costs of building the spring were covered by the income from the pharmacies, which the young man developed on his own. Things were going better than ever. But Evan wasn't about to stop. He wanted this place to become a fortress, a stronghold of strength and independence. If the entire gaming world had previously hoped for one hero to save everyone, he intended to destroy that illusion. His city will no longer need a hero from outside. He himself will become a hero. Or more precisely, he will create a system where protection and development do not depend on one person. Evan dreamed of a city that could stand on its own feet. Mabel, hearing his thoughts, did not fully understand the meaning of his words but firmly said, "Without Evan, this city simply would not exist." Evan suddenly realized that despite all his efforts, despite how much he had given, he was not moving away from death, but was only getting closer to it with each passing day. He wasn't going to be just a player. He was going to be the one who changed everything. Who said he can't become the main hero of his city? Evan came to Bernard holding stones he had made himself. The alchemist examined them carefully and was amazed. The work was impeccable. This meant that Evan's training in alchemy was nearing completion. Bernard praised the student for his impressive progress. In response, Evan noted with a grin that since the mentor no longer had urgent matters, it was high time to help with current tasks. Bernard just sighed. Soon the pharmacy staff gathered to go to the spring to rest. Bernard had previously asked Evan for free admission for all workers, and Evan understood why. This gesture strengthened the old man's authority in the eyes of the staff and inspired loyalty among the team. Evan even wanted to thank Bernard by giving him a share of the profits from the source's income. But he refused, citing the fact that at his age money no longer meant anything. Eventually, they headed to the spring with the pharmacists. There, Evan met his friends, Shine and Ryan. Both had just finished training. Evan asked how they were doing. Shine confidently reported that he had already caught up with everything he had missed during his stay in the capital. Ryan responded modestly. During this time, he achieved almost nothing. Shine disagreed. He recalled that Ryan had significantly improved his physical fitness and had clearly become stronger. Evan noticed this too, but he knew that physical strength alone was not enough. If Ryan wanted to protect anyone, he needed to start training with weapons immediately. Evan said that starting tomorrow he would have shield training. Ryan was delighted and promised to give it his all. After bathing, everyone enjoyed cold milk. The machine installed at the source was already popular, and Evan noted with satisfaction that the investment would quickly pay for itself. Suddenly, he heard a familiar female voice. It was Servina. Together with Hannah, they also visited the spring. The young man was surprised to see her. They hadn't met for a long time. Servina asked with interest who the guy next to Evan was. He introduced Ryan. Servina and Hannah immediately surrounded him with attention, not skimping on compliments. The young man clearly caught their eye. The next day, Evan handed Ryan a training shield. He was delighted and swore that he would use it to protect his master. However, Evan stopped him. The shield is only for training. He sternly warned them not to try to protect Evan with his help. Otherwise, both will die. Ryan didn't understand what his friend was talking about. Then Evan, looking at him seriously, asked, "Has he ever heard of cursed artifacts?" Ryan wondered what the true power of this shield was. Evan explained that by reflecting one attack with a shield, it would be as powerful as reflecting two attacks. And if Ryan puts on another artifact, the effectiveness will increase fourfold. Ryan's task was to learn how to use all of this. Leaving his friend to train, Evan went to visit Shine. Shine looked upset. His sadness was explained simply. Even now, despite his persistent training, he felt that he was not strong enough. Evan didn't know how to comfort him. The reason for this difference was in Shine's very origin. He was a demigod, and the requirements for him were completely different. In an attempt to cheer himself up, Shine showed Evan a new skill he had learned during his blade training. His name was Crimson Shadow. The idea was that the more blood there was on the blade, the faster the owner's movements became, and the faster his stamina was restored. Once he mastered it, Shine was truly delighted. This skill was ideal for fighting against multiple enemies. Evan agreed that the ability was indeed worthwhile, adding that the skill would only improve with practice. But Shine doubted it. Such techniques cannot be honed on the training field. They are tempered only in real battles. Evan nodded and suggested a solution. Use real blood. Shine, hearing this, became wary. Was his friend really suggesting killing for the sake of training? But Evan just grinned and showed the vials he had prepared. The blood of goblins and other monsters. He explained that this blood would be enough to activate the Crimson Shadow and train it safely. However, despite the attractiveness of this ability, it also had a downside. The effect of the skill on Shine's body, especially considering his young age, was detrimental. The body was subjected to significant wear and tear. So Evan decided to organize safe training for him in the dungeon until he mastered the skill without any threat to his health. He was sure that Shine had great potential. There were ways to strengthen his stamina, and he would be able to master the art of Crimson Shadow much faster than expected. Evan also noted that when honing this technique, it's not just the blood that's important, but its variety. Different types at the moment of battle enhance the effect. The intensity of movements is also important. So he prepared a scheme for Shine. Apply blood to the blades in a certain way, and then run 100 meters back and forth every time the skill was activated. This was the best way to quickly develop the power of the Crimson Shadow. Shine was hesitant. He thought he would look ridiculous if any of the knights saw him training like this. But Evan just smiled. There was no other way out anyway, and Shine had to agree. When Evan got home, he checked on Ryan and then went to see Shine. Only Lua remains. Evan knew that every time, as soon as Lua finished her business, she quickly disappeared, citing training with the lamp. He had long suspected that the girl was hiding something, but he did not attach any importance to it. After all, everyone has personal matters. But now, as they prepared to go down into the dungeon together, he realized he needed to know how ready she really was. He had to figure out what exactly she was keeping secret. It had been 2 hours since the search began, but Evan could not find Lua anywhere. He searched all the familiar places and began to get nervous. If he had been more attentive earlier, he would not have wasted time now. It was at this moment that Miriam approached him. She was surprised by the unexpected meeting. Miriam asked who he was looking for. Lizzie was with her, and the girl was delighted to see Evan, as he rarely appeared in this part of the house. Miriam, on the contrary, was a little offended. Evan completely stopped visiting them. Although Lizzie loves him so much, Evan apologized and asked directly if they had seen Lua. He explained that the matter was urgent, but he could not find her. Miriam hesitated for a moment, but then finally revealed the truth. Lua was now with his mother, where Redden was teaching her skills related to aristocratic traditions. Tea ceremony, floristry, etiquette. All of this was included in the program. Evan didn't understand why Beloit was doing all this. Miriam then explained that his mother saw Lua as a potential lover for Evan and was now preparing her for this role so that she would match him in all respects. Evan was only 9 years old, and the very idea of such a thing seemed absurd to him. He was angry. The young man could not believe that things had gone this far, and he could not imagine that the Crimson Witch, his battle companion, would end up in such a role. It had been 3 years since he last drank tea with his mother. He didn't even think that she could be so bored as to take Beluas's training seriously. But then Evan began to understand. It was thanks to this training that her magical abilities had grown so much. Even though she hadn't learned any new combat spells, her manual sensitivity and control had improved noticeably. He realized that in this world, repetition and focus on specific actions can sharpen skills, and even the exquisite serving of tea can become a way to strengthen your inner strength, if you do it long enough and diligently enough. With these thoughts, Evan walked up to his mother's room door and knocked. Without waiting for an answer, he announced that he was entering. His appearance caught Redden off guard. Beloit looked frightened. There were cups of tea and an open book on the table. Evan asked her why she never told him she was a mage. To avoid beating around the bush, he asked his mother directly if she really was a witch. Redden was stunned by her son's insight and asked him how he came up with it. Evan calmly replied that he had 4 reasons for this. Her surprise only increased. She did not expect to hear so much. Then Evan started listing. The first reason was the cups on the table. They were untouched, but he could smell the faint aroma of Afronicum, a substance added to tea during witchcraft. The second was a book. It was not just a volume with a worn cover, but a diary artifact, hiding what was written from prying eyes. Such books were used exclusively by witches. The third was a lamp. Although it was no longer burning, the flame was still smoldering in it. This meant that it had been activated very recently. Most likely, Lua just finished using it during her magical practice. The fourth reason is Lua herself. Her magical abilities have increased dramatically in recent times. This was impossible without a good mentor, and, as was now becoming obvious, that was his mother. Redden smiled and praised her son's observation skills and admitted, "Yes, she is not just a sorceress, but a real witch." Evan was taken aback. The game he came from didn't mention anything about witches. There were demigods, demons, magicians, but not a single mention of creatures like her. Redden said she spent most of her life wandering until she met his father. Then, having fallen in love, she decided to leave the past, stopped practicing magic, and became an ordinary woman. Her abilities, it turned out, were passed down through the female line, but she had only 2 sons, no heir. However, when she met Lua, she immediately noticed something special about her. and she decided to pass on her knowledge to her, as if Lua were the very daughter that was not given to her. Now that Evan knew her secret, one of her most deeply hidden, Radin noticed that he too was unusual. She hoped that he would respond to her frankness with frankness and tell her what he himself was hiding. Evan thought about it. His mother had never played a key role in the game he was now essentially living. In none of the parts did she become a central character. Moreover, in the third part, in which he was now, his character died many times, and the plot involving Redden simply did not exist. This meant only one thing: the script had changed, and perhaps now he had a chance to survive, thanks to an ally he had never dreamed of before. He realized he had nothing to lose. When Redden politely asked Lua to leave the room, Evan made the decision to tell everything, and he started from the very beginning, from the moment when he had his first strange dream. Evan has been training with Shine for a long time. The main goal was to master the skill of an imperturbable, indifferent facial expression. In Shine's opinion, Evan was doing a bad job of it. His gaze was too lively, his smile too sincere. But Evan didn't give up. He knew that his birthday was approaching and he would have to go out into society. Showing up to the reception with a charming smile and attractive appearance would be tantamount to suicide. Evan understood perfectly well that if he showed his charm, he would instantly find himself in the center of attention of girls. And this, he believed, increased his chances of death. Therefore, the indifferent mask was necessary, like armor. Shine, having listened to the arguments, was amazed. He didn't understand why Evan couldn't just be friends with girls, like he had with Mabel and Beloit. However, Evan just shrugged. According to him, all women are beautiful and cunning. They are easy to get close to. At that moment, Beloit approached. Evan hoped that she had not heard the last words. Beloit reported that she brought a letter from the Emperor, intended personally for the master. Evan's blood ran cold. He knew that if his father had already looked at the letter, it was serious. This means that the Emperor himself is going to come to the city to see him. Rumors spread quickly. Everyone was discussing the upcoming visit of the Emperor, his wife, son, and daughter. But Evan understood that the visit was not connected with the discovery of springs or with a polite visit. He remembered how the Emperor had once tried to marry his daughter to him, and he felt that this was the reason for the visit. Evan's father was furious. He clearly saw where this was going, but he was not going to allow his son to become the Emperor's son-in-law. The mother tried to be more objective. She noted that the princess was not so bad, but admitted that their son was too special for such a fate. In the end, the father proposed his own solution. Evan should announce at the reception that he would become the new head of the nightly squad. This position would mean that he would be forever bound to this city and could not leave it by order of the Emperor. Shine was surprised. He asked again, "Is Evan really going to take such a position?" Typically, representatives of noble families did not take on such roles. But Evan was determined. This was his plan. He knew that if he became commander, it would be obvious to the Emperor that marriage was impossible. A groom confined to a provincial town is no match for the king's daughter. Meanwhile, preparations for the holiday were in full swing in the house. The servants were bustling about. The girls were whispering. Everyone agreed on one thing. If the gentleman had not had such a strange character, he would have been the most handsome man in the city. Evan approached Mabel and asked how the preparations were going. She confidently replied that everything was under control. She had her own party plan, and it turned out that she was also planning to invite famous girls to Evan's birthday party. Mabel excitedly informed Evan that a famous musical group called the Cuties had agreed to perform at his party. Evan was stunned. He, trying to stay away from any situations that could bring death upon him, now had to endure a whole crowd of girls at his birthday party. As it turned out, the group agreed to perform not for a fee, but in exchange for Evan's autograph. This news only increased his irritation. He felt that instead of moving away from danger, he was, on the contrary, moving closer and closer to it. Without wasting any time, Evan took the list of tasks from the maid and reviewed the event plan. Mabel was surprised by his determination. She believed that an aristocrat should not be involved in organizing his own holiday. However, Evan insisted he would take control himself. He ordered the Cuties to perform in the first part of the event, singing calm songs that would not distract attention from the main guest, the Emperor. Immediately after this, they were to leave the stage. Evan hoped that at this very moment the Emperor would leave the city, and it would be possible to move on to the second part of the celebration, which would be more informal. Then the band will be able to perform their fiery compositions, and everyone will really have fun. Evan then went to the drugstore to personally invite its employees to the birthday party. The common people were surprised. It's not every day that the nobility invites commoners to a social event. However, Evan assured them that they were not commoners at all. He asked everyone to come in their work uniforms to avoid unnecessary questions from the aristocracy. Hannah felt a little sad when she heard this. She hoped to wear a nice dress and dance with Ryan. Evan noticed this, but tried to smooth over his disappointment. According to him, the second part of the holiday would be fun, and then everyone would be able to have fun as they wished. He also said that Servina would appear in her monastic habit to emphasize the spirit of service rather than secular fun. Evan didn't forget about Bernard either. The old man refused to come at first, but Evan, using all his charm, finally convinced him. He promised that he would be able to personally communicate with the group members. Bernard agreed, but warned that if the party seemed boring to him, he would leave at any moment. Later, Shine reported that some boxes had arrived. Evan explained, "This is a new uniform for his demigod servants." From that day on, they had to wear clothes that were appropriate for candidates for the nightly squad, a symbol of belonging to a special structure and new duties. Next, Evan headed to the butcher shop where he had been before. He offered the owner, who sold the meat of monsters and creatures killed in the dungeons, to become a cook at his festival. At first he hesitated, but Evan managed to convince him, assuring him that the guests would definitely like the grilled meat. For the chef, this was a unique opportunity. No one refused the flattering invitation to cook for the aristocracy. In the end, the man agreed, but insisted that Evan take on all the organizational part. Evan was pleased with the agreement reached. If the nobility likes the monster meat, it will be possible to open a new establishment in the city and make a profit from it. Preparations were in full swing. Servants were laying down carpets, carefully washing the floors and hanging decorations. Evan took control of the organization, which did not please Mabel. She reminded him that the gentleman should be preparing for his own celebration and not dealing with logistics. The hall for the celebration was decorated simply but tastefully. The men in the audience remarked that it was one of the best places they had ever been. The decor was not pretentious, but still retained a sense of luxury. The guests looked at the members of the group, Malashki, with interest, discussing how Evan managed to invite such stars. Many believed that the young host of the party had connections at the highest level. Bernard, carefully examining the ceiling decorations, noticed that their cost exceeded the annual income of many employees. Hannah, looking at the magnificence of the hall, doubted whether it was appropriate for them, simple pharmacy workers, to be here. Bernard reassured her, reminding her that they were part of a brotherhood and no one would dare to hurt them. In Hannah's eyes, he looked fearless, almost noble. It even seemed to her that Bernard could be an aristocrat. But he rejected this assumption and warned, if someone pretended to be noble and his identity was revealed, the retribution would be worse than death. He advised the girl to be careful with such words. Bernard called the waiter and ordered a glass of wine, intending to watch the celebration. At this time, Evan was getting ready to go out. Mabel reported that all the guests were talking only about him. There were also rumors swirling around the dungeon. Shine said that the expedition was unable to advance beyond the 45th floor due to the great transformation that had begun. These are phenomena in which the structure of the dungeon changes radically, giving rise to new dangers. The servants anxiously discussed whether Evan really intended to go into the dungeon himself. He confirmed his plans, but with a caveat: the hike would be limited to just 5 floors. Previously, he wanted to reach the 10th, but he feared the wrath of the Marquis if he found out about such intentions. The main threat on every 5th floor was the gatekeeper, a monster that no 12-year-old had ever defeated. Shine was amazed when Evan announced that he would be going on the campaign with a squad of knights and a vice-captain, Shine himself. The young man entrusted him with the preparation and, despite his subordinates' doubts, remained serious. When it was time to go out to the guests, Evan looked impeccable, and the servants watched their master with admiration. He ordered one of the maids to keep everything she heard a secret. The Ferrati family also arrived for the celebration. Everyone admired the beauty of Alicia, a young lady from a noble family. Even Bernard admitted that the girl was beautiful. Hannah noted that Alicia is as popular as Evan. Mr. Ferrati's son asked anxiously about Beloit, hoping that she would not appear with Evan. Meanwhile, Alicia herself felt disgusted by everything that was happening. The looks of men directed at her irritated her. She felt like a stranger in this room. The parents were worried about their daughter, but the father promised that as soon as Evan appeared, he would personally take her to him. Alicia's brother recalled the duel with Evan with interest, wondering how much stronger he had become. Trumpets sounded in the hall, announcing the arrival of the host family. The guests saw that the Marquis himself had arrived in excellent physical shape, which inspired confidence that the city was probably flourishing. Someone asked where the second wife was, but they assumed that she stayed with her youngest daughter. Evan's father thanked everyone for coming, noting that his eldest son had turned 12 3 years ago, and now it was his youngest turn. He proudly introduced Evan, calling himself the luckiest father. Meanwhile, Evan stood backstage, worried. Shane noted that the Marquis could talk for hours about his son's virtues. Suddenly, Belua came running with important news. The Emperor himself had arrived at the main entrance. Everything didn't go according to plan. He arrived much earlier than planned. The young man's father was in a hurry to meet an important guest who had arrived for the celebration with his family. He immediately realized that such an early visit was due to the whim of the Emperor's daughter, who desperately wanted to see Evan again. Having greeted the monarch, the father gave the command to the musicians to play. Then he solemnly introduced his son. Evan appeared in the hall, causing admiration for his appearance. Those present whispered about how handsome he was, and someone even remarked that he outshone his mother. The princess looked at him with love, and the maid who dressed Evan looked with pride at the fruits of her labor. The servants accompanied Evan. Shine asked him to give up his usual training with the slugs, at least for today. Beloit was worried that such strange and daring actions could damage his reputation and destroy the ideal image that had formed in the eyes of others. But that's exactly what Evan was after. He was deliberately breaking expectations, destroying stereotypes, showing that he wasn't going to follow someone else's script. He wanted people to perceive him not as just another heir to a noble family, but as a person with his own choices and convictions. Evan's father approached him and warmly congratulated him on his birthday. His gaze expressed pride, although hidden behind his usual severity. Evan responded with respect, promising that he would never disgrace the name of their family and would do everything to benefit the city and its inhabitants. It was not just a formal answer but a sincere statement reflecting his inner convictions. The Marquis, according to plan, decided to ask the young man what his plans were for the future. Evan's answer surprised everyone. He intended to create his own knightly squad, whose main task would be to explore and protect dungeons. Moreover, he personally intended to lead it and take responsibility for the city's security in this direction. This statement caused confusion among the guests. Many did not understand why a young man who was not even a direct heir would take on such a burden. Until this moment, there was nothing like this in the city. Special squads purposefully exploring the dungeons. All such initiatives were the prerogative of experienced masters, guilds, and military commanders. And suddenly a boy who was barely 12 years old declares his intention to create a new structure. The Emperor, holding back slight bewilderment, asked a direct question. Why did Evan choose this particular path? Was it an escape from responsibilities or a desire to prove something to yourself? The Marquis hastened to intervene to dispel any possible doubts. He confidently explained that His Imperial Majesty had a misunderstanding. Evan does not run from fate and does not act rashly. On the contrary, he made a decision long before the recent events, and all the preparation was carried out systematically. This was not an impulse but a conscious path that the young man gradually took. Evan confirmed his father's words. He said that he had already managed to gather candidates for his future squad. When he introduced his comrades to those present, some of the guests recognized them as Ryan, Shine, and Beloit. This caused a stir in the room. Skepticism quickly turned into outright distrust. Many considered such an undertaking not only naive, but also dangerous. Teenagers under the age of 18 are prohibited by law from going down into the dungeons. Even with talent and training, this is a risk zone not intended for children. For most of the guests, the idea of teenagers forming a knightly squad seemed like nothing more than child's play. Some smirked, others exchanged disapproving glances. Even the most liberal of the nobility could not take this initiative seriously. But Evan wasn't surprised by this reception. He had foreseen all this in advance. That's why he had a trump card prepared. He made a loud announcement. Together with Ryan, Shine, and Beloit, he intends to go down into the dungeon in the near future. Their goal will be to eliminate the strongest monster of the 5th level. Evan promised to bring its head as proof that their team is ready for real battles. These words had the effect of a bomb exploding. The hall froze. Even Evan's father was shocked. He did not expect such recklessness from his son. After all, such an act means a direct violation of the ban. This is a risk not only for life, but also for the reputation of the entire family. But Evan was willing to take that risk. He knew that in his case, words weren't enough. You need to prove the seriousness of your intentions with your actions. and only then will those around you stop perceiving you as a child. It was the deed that was the only argument in this world. At that moment, Captain Michael entered the hall. His appearance was most opportune. He was considered the strongest warrior in the empire and enjoyed great respect among all those present. The captain did not remain silent. He confirmed that the young knights were indeed prepared. He personally watched their training, saw how they grew, and was sure that these children were capable of more than many adult fighters. His words served as an important confirmation. Now even the most doubtful began to waver. If Michael himself vouches for them, then there really is something to it. It was no longer just a young man's whim. It was becoming a new reality. Captain Michael, confident in the strength of the young fighters, made a statement. He personally trained Evan's team and knew perfectly well what they were capable of. His words were full of confidence, but the Marquis, like his father, remained skeptical. To finally dispel doubts, Michael proposed to hold a demonstration duel between his experienced knights and Evan's squad. The Marquis had no reason to refuse the offer, especially in the presence of the Emperor and other high-ranking guests. Moreover, the idea of such a duel excited the imagination and could become an excellent spectacle. Evan had made a deal with Michael in advance. The captain was to tell his men not to fight at full strength, so as not to humiliate the young fighters. However, Michael unexpectedly assured that this would not be necessary. The teenagers already possessed such power that they would be able to fight on equal terms, and perhaps even surpass adults. The Emperor, who showed keen interest in the proposed duel, immediately ordered that the fight not be postponed. He ordered the arena to be prepared and proposed that the battle begin immediately. Evan wasted no time in asking the musicians to perform something solemn and energetic, something befitting the great test. As the ranks of guests parted to make room, the fighters entered the arena. 3 young warriors, Shine, Beloit, and Ryan, stepped forward, their steps confident, their gaze focused. They were allowed to use both weapons and magic. Opposite them stood 3 knights, strong, experienced, seasoned in battle. And then the signal to begin sounded. The opponents rushed at each other. The duel, which had become a test of the maturity and skill of the young fighters, entered its active phase. Everything happened quickly. Ryan was the first to activate his special ability, the Protector's Blessing. At that very moment, the knights began to have problems. Their weapons seemed to stop obeying, becoming heavy and uncontrollable. This confused them and caused them to hesitate. While the adult warriors were trying to figure out what was happening, Shine rushed forward. His movements were swift, precise, and devoid of hesitation. He attacked without hesitation. Each blow was precise. The sword blade cut through the air with a force and precision that even the most experienced spectators would not have expected to see. The knights still tried to regroup and counterattack, but then they were in for another surprise. Their legs were bound by magical ice. It was the work of Balua, a young sorceress from Evan's squad. She used a freezing spell at the right moment, paralyzing the opponent's movements. And, without giving them time to recover, the girl immediately used the next technique, a powerful fireball that flew straight at one of the knights. A flash of light illuminated the arena, causing the crowd to gasp in surprise. Captain Michael, who was watching the fight, realized that there was no point in continuing. He raised his hand, signaling a halt, and declared the fight over. The winners were Shine, Beloit, and Ryan, Evan's squad. Silence fell. The audience, led by the Emperor, the Marquis Ferrati, the Counts, and the Masters, was stunned. Their faces reflected genuine amazement. No one expected such power, tactics, and coordination of actions from teenagers. Even Evan's father, who had always been reserved about his initiatives, lost his composure for a moment. For the first time, he saw how much power his son and his team had. A murmur went through the ranks. Some admired the courage of the young fighters, others discussed the effectiveness of the magic used. But everyone was unanimous on one thing. The children standing in the arena were no longer just students or apprentices. They proved that they were worthy of the title of true knights, ready to defend the city from any threats, be it from the depths of the dungeons or from outside. So the victory of Evan's squad became more than just a show of strength. It turned into a symbol of a new generation of heroes ready to take responsibility for the future. The Emperor noted with admiration how spectacular the duel turned out to be, and was forced to acknowledge Evan's leadership qualities, as well as his ability to assemble a strong team. However, he was interested in how strong Evan himself was. This was not the reaction the young man had expected. He sought support from the captain, but Michael only wished him luck, confident that the boy could handle it on his own. Evan realized that the plan was getting out of control. Now he would have to enter the fight personally. Even the princess insisted that he take part. If he refuses, he will lose the chance to descend into the dungeon. Captain Michael volunteered to be his opponent. The Marquis was calm. He knew that the captain would not allow Evan to get seriously injured. Alicia watched what was happening with interest. As the fight began, Ryan explained that the bout would be judged on fighting skills. Evan and the captain took up strange positions that were incomprehensible to the audience, and then rushed at each other. Their first blow was so powerful that it destroyed everything in its path. His wave crashed down on the audience. Evan began to shake from the tension, but he did not give up. He delivered blows one after another, and Michael confidently blocked each one. Those present were amazed at his strength. Such power could not be inherent in a child. Some suggested that he was using an artifact. However, Bernard knew that Evan's power did not depend on magical items. It belonged to him. Even if there was an artifact, it would only enhance the young man's innate potential. Mr. Ferrati noted that Evan delivered his punches with amazing dexterity and skill. Watching the fight, many of the guests could not hide their surprise, but Alicia's father was especially amazed. He could not understand how young Evan had managed to master such complex fighting techniques at such a young age. Every move he made, every attack and dodge was honed like that of an adult, experienced fighter. Evan held his own with dignity, not yielding to the captain in either fortitude or spirit, despite the obvious difference in experience and strength. Alicia watched the duel with delight. Her eyes were shining. She watched every movement with interest, and at times even caught herself holding her breath. There was genuine interest in her gaze, and her father noticed it. He didn't hesitate for long and asked her a direct question. Would she like to get engaged to this young man? The girl thought about it but quickly smiled, saying that she wouldn't be against it, provided that Evan himself agreed. She found the idea exciting and interesting. Her father, pleased with such an easy consent, promised that he would arrange everything so that Evan would have no reason to refuse the offer. Meanwhile, the outcome of the fight became more and more obvious. Evan was on the edge. His strength was leaving him. His movements were becoming slower. His breathing was becoming heavier. And here comes the decisive blow. Michael, taking advantage of the moment, made a precise and powerful lunge, knocking Evan off his feet. The duel was over. Ryan, who had been watching the battle, loudly and clearly announced the winner, Captain Michael. He then walked up to the defeated Evan and asked him if he would admit defeat. Evan nodded, breathing heavily. He accepted the result with dignity. Despite the loss, there was no resentment or disappointment in his gaze, only calm understanding. Captain Michael, in turn, also stepped forward and addressed Evan. He noted how much the young man had changed since their last meeting. He had become stronger, not only physically, but also internally. He exuded confidence, determination, and strength of character. Michael was generous with his praise. He said that Evan had fought with dignity and proven his readiness for the upcoming mission, going underground. For Evan, it was not just a recognition but a kind of symbolic admission, like a knight's blessing. Among the guests, Cron Ferrati watched the fight closely. He turned to his son, Crow, and asked if he still considered himself Evan's equal. Crow reluctantly but honestly admitted that no. Evan had made huge strides since their last meeting. He surpassed him in both skill and spirit. This admission did not come easy to Crow, but he did not beat around the bush. Evan's father, although reserved in his emotions, was also forced to acknowledge his son's achievements. He knew that not allowing him to move forward would limit his growth, so he agreed to let Evan join the expedition into the dungeon. However, he set one important condition: not to go deeper than the 5th level. This restriction was supposed to guarantee safety, but Evan didn't argue. On the contrary, he was pleased. This plan was in complete agreement with his own calculations. Deep down, he hoped that on his next birthday, he would receive permission from his father to advance to level 10. For now, he decided to enjoy the moment and take advantage of the chance that was presented to him. But fate made unexpected adjustments to his plans. The Emperor's daughter, with whom he had already spoken before, approached him. She said that she followed his advice, trained hard, and now felt that she had changed and become stronger. There was pride and determination in her voice as she confidently declared that she wanted to join his knightly troop. Her gaze was serious, and Evan realized that her intentions were not a spontaneous impulse. She was truly ready to go into battle with him. Evan was stunned. The princess's behavior seemed inexplicable to him. Why would she risk her own life by voluntarily asking to join his squad? After all, she knew what dangers were associated with traveling underground. But before he could consider her motives, Another girl approached him, Alicia. She stated that her appearance there was pure coincidence, but at the same time admitted that she herself wanted to join his team. Evan tensed internally. Now, two possible reasons for his death in the future were insistently striving to remain close. It all seemed alarming, unpredictable, and almost like a trap of fate. At this point, Shine, one of Evan's confidants, reported important news. The Emperor, the Marquis, Count Ferrati, and other high-ranking guests had retired for a private conversation. Evan immediately decided to take advantage of this gap. He gave orders to change the decorations of the hall and ordered the musicians to play a different melody. The girls responsible for the musical accompaniment understood the hint without words. The hall was filled with light, danceable tunes. The dancing began. Hannah and Ryan were the first to join in. The girl invited him, and he readily agreed. However, Servina, who had lingered in the dressing room, did not have time. When she returned, Ryan was already dancing. Evan regretfully suggested that she ask him to the next dance, and Servina reluctantly agreed. Meanwhile, the princess resolutely grabbed Evan by the hand and literally dragged him to the middle of the hall. Their dance immediately attracted the attention of everyone present. The guests watched with keen interest. How the young hero danced with the emperor's daughter. How skillfully he behaved in public, as if he had spent his whole life at such receptions. During the dance, the princess noted with a smile that Evan had become very popular. Her gaze lingered for a moment on Alicia, who had been looking at the young man the entire time. The princess asked when he had managed to meet this girl. Evan was quick to assure her that they had only met once. That was true, but he didn't want to go into details. The siren said that dancing with him was like playing with worms, but there was a hint of play in her tone. Then she suddenly asked for another dance. But Evan politely declined. He had other plans. He noticed how the guests began to gather around the tables with refreshments. There, the preparation of the main dish was just coming to an end. Meat obtained from a defeated monster in the dungeon. The aroma was incredible, filling the entire room with warm, spicy notes. However, the guests were still hesitant. They were stopped by the thought. Would they get poisoned by trying such an exotic dish? Unexpectedly, the princess was the first to take a step forward. She took a piece of meat, tried it without thinking, and with a sincere smile admitted that it was the most delicious thing she had eaten that evening. Her confession was decisive. Evan realized that now everything would work out. If a member of the nobility and even a princess gave her approving assessment, the rest will certainly follow her example. He loudly announced that this was monster meat, prepared by their chef, and it was completely safe for health. People began to chat animatedly. Some approached the table, some were already ordering a portion. Gradually, the crowd of people enjoying the treats grew larger and larger. Evan watched with relief. His plan had worked, but then he heard a voice behind him. Turning around, he saw a middle-aged man with a confident posture. It was the leader of the Thunderer Guild. He was happy to see that Evan recognized him and immediately started a conversation. Without further ado, he announced that their elite guild was in dire need of new, promising personnel. He even invited Ryan, who was standing nearby, to join them. Evan immediately and abruptly refused. His voice was cold and firm. He didn't even try to hide his irritation. The guild leader tried to continue, began to praise their merits, mentioning the high positions and rare resources that the members of his organization possessed. But Evan was adamant. He turned away without answering and simply ordered himself a portion of meat. The man reacted with obvious irritation. His face expressed bewilderment. Why was the young man refusing such a brilliant opportunity? What was he guided by? After all, the offer was profitable and almost honorable. But Evan had no doubts about his decision. He knew who he was dealing with. This man hadn't come here just as a guest. He had come for him, for Ryan. His purpose was clear. Evan wasn't going to give up anyone on his team, especially Ryan. He remembered the plot of the game well. The head of the Thunderer really had a talent for finding promising people. He was the first to recognize the potential of the main character in the second part of the game. His sense of talent was considered legendary. But even knowing this, Evan didn't let it interfere with his plans. He stood firm. Ryan would stay with him. The man was extremely irritated. His gaze became cold and prickly, and his voice became harsh. It wasn't so much Evan's behavior itself that angered him, but the feeling that the young man could see right through him. The boy's gaze was calm, but there was a firmness in it that made the adult warrior begin to lose his composure. It seemed like every hidden motive, every carefully chosen word, Evan had already anticipated it all. This feeling of helplessness and vulnerability made the man increasingly angry. In a fit of irritation, he hissed that the young lord would do well to moderate his appetite. It was a last attempt to sting, to hurt, to save dignity. Evan immediately realized that the refusal had hit the mark. He had hit a weak spot. The man was not used to receiving refusals, especially from such young interlocutors. This reaction only confirmed Evan's suspicions. This was not just an ambitious guild leader. This man would become a dangerous traitor in the future. According to the game's plot, he will break his oaths, betray the city, and deal a crushing blow from within. Evan knew about it, and now he had no doubts. It was impossible to negotiate with such people. One had to be wary with them, and when the opportunity arose, he would get rid of it before it was too late. He could not act openly now, but he already had in mind how he should act in the future. As the tense moment subsided, other people began to approach Evan. Their faces were much friendlier. The first was the head of the Wandering Paradise Guild, Alan. He was known for his level-headedness and honesty. Daisy, his second in command, walked next to him. She smiled at Evan and greeted him with genuine warmth. The two, as Evan knew from the game's story, were loyal allies. The Wandering Paradise Guild valued loyalty above all else and stood by the protagonist's side until the very end. Together with him, they defended the city from enemy raids, sparing no effort. Other representatives followed suit. Among them were fighters from the Phoenix Guild, bright, confident, famous for their attacking strategies. And a little later, representatives of other guilds appeared. One after another, as if in a chain, representatives of different associations approached Evan. Each of them wanted to meet me personally, shake my hand, and express respect. Their looks showed interest, expectation, sometimes even envy. Some of them would become his comrades in the future. They will fight side by side with him on the front lines, sharing victories and defeats. Among those who arrived was Elua, known as the Ice Witch. Her magic froze entire squads, and her cold nature scared away even her allies. But Evan recognized her immediately. In the game, she was a member of the Heartshield Guild and became one of the main character's most valuable allies. Now she stood next to him, and her gaze was softer than in battle. The number of guests only grew. It seemed like there was no end to the flow. Some approached with genuine interest, others with calculation. Among them were both future allies and potential enemies. Some of these faces would later end up in the camp of traitors, but for now it was all hidden behind smiles and politeness. Evan couldn't do anything but watch, analyze, and remember every encounter. Another thing that attracted special attention to the young man was the combat technique that Captain Michael had taught him. Evan didn't hide it. He said that this technique was a special technique that Michael received during the Blessing of Power. This moment in the game was significant. It was then that the captain became one of the strongest fighters in the Empire. He later passed this power on to Evan, teaching him a technique not available to ordinary warriors. Then, Evan told about his squad. He did not hide his intentions. Their goal was clear: to protect the city from the threats coming from the dungeon. They did not strive to completely clear all the floors, nor did they pursue the idea of glory or trophies. The main thing for them was to create a defensive line, strengthen key borders, and ensure the safety of civilians. They sought power to serve, not to rule. Evan also noted that he had no interest in the top floor of the dungeon. He knew there was nothing important there. As a player, he had been there hundreds of times and knew perfectly well that there were no values there, only danger. And now that he was living this life, death would mean more than just a reboot. It would be the end. And he wasn't going to risk it for that. Suddenly, a calm and commanding voice sounded nearby. He noticed that what he heard was a relief to him. The young man who came said that he would be sad if Evan died. Evan de Chardin recognized the voice immediately. In front of him stood Prince Damien, Princess Serena's brother. Evan had not expected him to appear. A murmur immediately arose among the guests. Everyone recognized the stranger as the Crown Prince Damien L. Silklin. He approached Evan and, without hiding his superiority, expressed his joy at meeting him. The boy bowed politely and, hiding his confusion, replied that he was glad to meet him. But the prince immediately remarked sarcastically that you couldn't tell that from his appearance. Evan didn't look away. He felt that this was not just a guest but a person who had come with a specific purpose. Damien confirmed it. He had come in person to give the order, and Evan was forced to listen to him. The prince demanded that he protect his sister Serena as he protected his own life. This was not advice but a direct order. However, Evan, to everyone's surprise, refused. The princess's face reflected bewilderment, and Demian, confused, asked if Evan liked his sister. The young man answered evasively that his personal sympathies were not subject to discussion at the moment. He declared that in the future he would become the captain of the Dungeon Knight Squad, and his wife would be forever linked to this city. If Serena is not ready for such a fate, he will not make her his wife. Serena froze. All eyes turned to her. But instead of tears or embarrassment, she firmly said, she is ready to be with Evan anywhere. Moreover, she is going to join his squad. The princess's words shocked the audience. Even her brother hadn't expected this turn of events. His eyes flared with anger, thinking that Evan had somehow put this idea into her head. But Evan denied it. Damian drew his sword. His next order was much more personal. He challenged Evan to a duel. The conditions were unusual. If Evan lost, Siren would become his bride. Evan wanted to refuse, but refusal was not accepted. No one dared to disobey the will of the crown prince. The young man recalled Demian's abilities. He was known as a warrior who wielded a huge warhammer, but now he had a sword in his hands, clearly not his weapon. This meant that he would be weaker than usual. Evan agreed. In return, he made his own condition. If he won, the prince would never demand anything from him again. Demian agreed and ordered the guards to give the sword to his opponent. But Evan refused the offer. His technique, Might of Heaven, did not require weapons. It was a fighting style designed to repel attacks and destroy monstrous bodies. Damian had never seen anything like this before, and he wondered if the enemy could really put up a fight. The start of the duel was announced. The prince had no intention of holding back. He intended to crush Evan into dust. It was not a duel. It was an execution that he wanted to carry out in the presence of everyone. But moments later, Damian lay unconscious. One blow. All the audience saw was a flash of energy around Evan's fist. He didn't understand what had happened. Why had such a strong opponent fallen with the first blow? Even with a sword that was uncomfortable for him, he should have been able to hold on longer. Then Michael explained. During the swing, energy was gathering around Evan's fist. This was the essence of the technique, the power of heaven, a force against which even the crown prince was powerless. He explained that the reason for the defeat was simple. Damian was weaker, not physically but in essence. He chose the wrong path, the wrong weapon. Servina hurried to the prince. Thanks to her intervention, he soon came to his senses. His gaze darted to Evan, fear and confusion evident in it. He couldn't comprehend how he had been defeated with just one blow. Evan stepped forward. He wanted to tell Damian something important. Looking into the prince's eyes, he advised him to give up the sword. The weapon did not belong to his spirit. It did not respond to him. He spoke quietly but confidently. Damian should have chosen the hammer. Heavy, awkward, but his own weapon. He objected in confusion that the sword was a symbol of power, and only the emperor should wield it. The sword was light and versatile. Its training was considered correct. But Evan didn't back down. He explained that if a person continues to use power that doesn't belong to him, he will destroy himself. Everything that makes us strong should be close to us. Strength is not in the name of the weapon, but in how familiar it is. These words made Damian think. He said goodbye without saying another word and soon left the hall. The siren who remained nearby asked Evan to stay with her for at least one day. He agreed, but only for that evening. The princess invited him to dance with a smile. But Evan refused. He felt tired, and his thoughts were far from the holiday. A voice came from behind them. Alicia came up to them. With her usual impudence, she offered to dance with her, since he had refused Serena's invitation. Evan turned around in fear. He knew that once Alicia had made up her mind, it would be impossible to convince her otherwise. Suddenly, Serena intervened. If Evan didn't want to dance with Alicia, then let him dance with her again. The young man had no choice but to agree and dance with her. Alicia, watching this scene, noted with a grin that Evan was obviously popular. He replied that she was no less in demand. However, her smile instantly disappeared. She didn't like this popularity. The girl said something that left Evan confused. She said that she would soon be engaged to him. Evan froze, not knowing what to say. This was the outcome he had been trying to avoid with all his might. Alicia's words caught Evan off guard. He didn't expect to hear about an engagement. He was even more surprised by the statement that his father had allegedly already given his consent. Alicia assured that the Marquis de Chardin would only be glad of such an alliance. It was for this reason, according to her, that he went to speak with her father and the emperor himself. Evan's memory flashed back to the moment he saw his father leaving the negotiation room with the emperor and Alicia's father. This detail, which he had not attached any importance to at the time, now took on a dark meaning. Was it really about his marriage? He refused to believe it. It seemed crazy to him that someone would voluntarily agree to give their daughter to the future captain of the Dungeon Knights, a man whose life would be spent far from the light and well-being. But Alicia, judging by her words and behavior, had already made up her mind. Evan didn't understand why. She explained it simply. He gave the impression of a man who knew all the secrets of the world. And she also liked that he was afraid of her. This unexpected honesty struck him. He wondered with alarm. After all, this was only their second meeting. How could she have read him so quickly? Obviously, he needed to learn to hide his emotions better. But Alicia was only amused. She wanted to see how long he would be afraid of her. That was why she wanted to be there. Evan didn't know what to say to that. Everything that was happening seemed dangerous to him. He wanted to run away. But, alas, he was the main hero of the holiday. It was impossible to leave. He found himself giving in. Not to Alicia, but to temptation itself. Evan felt himself losing control. But that was when Servina appeared. She came up to him with a smile and asked him to give her some time. Soon Hannah came up. She also wanted to dance with him. Evan was confused. All the girls were suddenly seeking his attention. It was strange and a little scary. From the outside, it all looked almost comical. His friends watched what was happening with interest. Shine glanced at Beloit and asked why she didn't ask Evan to dance. But the girl seemed to be depressed. She watched as Evan was surrounded by a crowd of girls, thirsting for his attention, and it made her feel bitter. Shine offered to help her, but Beloit refused. She thought it was impolite to take the initiative. However, Shine could not watch her suffer and decided to take action himself. He called out loudly to Evan, declaring that there was a lady who desired his attention. He pointed to Beloit. Evan turned around and, seeing the girl, immediately approached. He apologized to her, realizing that he had indeed forgotten about her in the whirlwind of events. Her silence and hurt were more eloquent than words. Then he dropped to one knee and asked her permission to dance. Moreover, he offered to accompany her until the end of the evening, if she allowed it. Beloit was stunned. But looking into Evan's eyes, she agreed. Today she allowed herself to forget about conventions. Everyone watched the couple with interest. Their beauty and youth caused slight envy, because they had their whole life ahead of them. Alicia's brother noted with a slight grin that he, too, would not mind being in Evan's place and melting the heart of this beauty. During the dance, Beloit whispered to Evan that he looked like a real aristocrat who had the whole world in his hands. Evan didn't agree with it, but in the dance it didn't matter. They forgot about everything. Night fell. The celebration came to an end. The guests left. The sounds of music died down, and the estate became empty. The father told his son that he had turned down the engagement proposal. Evan felt a huge sense of relief. The emperor, as it turned out, also abandoned the idea of marrying his daughter to the future captain of the dungeon squad. But at the same time, the father added, if Cyrena herself wanted to go after Evan, no one would stop her. This thought was disturbing. Finally, the father advised his son to be more careful and attentive to how he creates his future image. Evan's father warned him that now that he had gathered people around him and taken them under his protection, he was responsible for them. Being a leader is not only an honor, but also a burden. It is up to the leader to decide whether his team will succeed or fail. He is responsible for human lives. Then, with a slight smile, he asked his son the question he had been carrying with him for a long time. Why did Evan avoid girls? The young man did not hide the truth. He admitted that he was afraid that one day someone would hurt him. The father listened to him without judgment. He understood how vulnerable his son's feelings were, but he still advised him not to close himself off from the world and to remain himself. After all, Evan had a rare gift, the ability to understand people, attract them, and find friends in them. He promised his son that he would always be there, support him in any situation, no matter who he became and where his path led him. Evan spent the night before the expedition alone, watching over potions, checking equipment, and thinking about things that kept him awake. In the morning, his health left much to be desired. Bernard, noticing this, asked what had happened. Evan reluctantly told about the incident that night. He remembered how Siren burst into his chambers, excited, joyful, and completely unceremonious. She stated that a new creature was about to appear and pointed to Mirazol's pendant, which began to glow strangely. Siren explained that this was due to the impending birth of the summoned creature. She wanted this particular slug, right now. According to her, Ruby had already told her everything, so she decided not to wait. Evan couldn't refuse her. After performing the summoning ritual, he summoned a new creature, Ice Slime. Cyrena was delighted with her new friend. She immediately gave the slug a name, Lucy, which Evan thought was quite unexpected. But he didn't object. After this, he strictly asked the girl not to burst into the men's rooms without warning in the future. Her behavior became more and more unpredictable and frightened him. In a conversation with Bernard, Evan admitted that he was afraid that he wouldn't be able to handle Siren if she continued in the same spirit. However, he proudly showed off his new inventions, battle beads, with which he was going to use magic in battle. Bernard, however, expressed doubt about the necessity of such tricks. He believed that Evan was capable of reaching the 5th level of the dungeon without this. When Evan left the house, his friends were already waiting for him. He said goodbye to his parents. The father did not hide his surprise. His son was going underground so early, and yet he was full of confidence. But now everything was different. Evan had companions. The young man was no longer alone. He managed to find friends that he had not had before. He promised himself he would not die. No way. This time he would be an immortal extra,